Hello there, and welcome. Wherever you are, in the hush of night or the drift of a quiet afternoon, may you find a place to rest. Perhaps you are lying down, eyelids heavy, or perhaps you are simply listening, letting sound carry you as if on a slow current. Tonight we lean into a question not of endings, not of catastrophe, but of silence and time. What if tomorrow humanity were to vanish? Not with violence, not with fire, but with a quiet disappearance. One morning, the cities still stand, the rivers still flow, the air still moves across the skin of the world. But there are no footsteps, no voices, no hands reaching for door handles or stirring the coals of a fire. The world wakes, but we do not. It is not a thought of fear, but of curiosity. What happens then? What does the earth feel in the first breath after we are gone? The day opens as it always does. Light spills across the continents, moving steadily, brushing against windows and empty kitchens. Birds sing their dawn songs as they always have, unaware that no one is there to hear them. A sparrow lands on a quiet rooftop. A crow lifts from the telephone line, which no longer hums with human electricity. A fox slips through a street where the scent of food lingers faintly but will fade soon. The first hours pass almost without notice. The world is already used to our absence in many corners. Forests where we rarely walked, deserts where our machines seldom touched, stretches of ocean that did not feel our boats. For these places, nothing changes. For the heart of cities, however, silence deepens in ways that feel unusual. No cars move along the avenues, no doors open to greet the sun. The rhythm of traffic lights continues for a time, clicking from red to green, unaware there are no eyes to notice. By the second day, grids begin to falter. Power plants, left untended, run down. Some fail quickly, others keep burning for a few days, a few weeks. Lights glow in scattered places like fading embers in the body of the earth. Then darkness returns, a darkness that was once broken by our insistence on brightness. The night sky grows richer. Stars reappear where cities once drowned them. The Milky Way arcs with quiet majesty, unseen by the ones who once mapped it. What does the earth think of this silence? Does the planet hold memory? Or is it only motion, air, water, fire, and stone, endlessly moving, indifferent to our absence? The question hangs gently, unanswered. In this first week, animals step cautiously into the spaces we leave behind. Deer emerge from edges of suburbs, pausing between garden fences. Pigeons still flutter above, nesting in rafters, the habits of centuries persisting without our crumbs and seeds. In homes, dogs wait, cats wander, livestock mill uncertainly. Some starve, some roam, some adapt. The balance shifts, but slowly, as though the earth is breathing in, deciding what to do with this sudden freedom. A month passes. Roads begin to gather dust and drifting leaves. The smell of exhaust has faded. Fields, once maintained by tractors and machines, begin to blur at their edges. Weeds push upward, grasses ripple across the borders, seeds carried on the wind. Gardens become forests in miniature, and forests themselves creep further out inch by inch as though curious to reclaim the forgotten ground. And yet, in these earliest years, so much remains. Towers still stand, glass still gleams, machines still rust quietly in place. The world looks almost the same, but under the surface, the change is already beginning. Without us, entropy and life collaborate. A crack widens in a pavement slab. A root follows, water seeps, rust spreads. Perhaps the earth notices this less as absence and more as balance. The balance we interrupted, returning now, patiently, inevitably. Imagine standing in a meadow that was once a city park. The grass is high and birds rise in flocks when a fox trots by. You look to the horizon, and the skyline is still there, jagged against the sky, but it is fading, softened by vines, muted by dust, leaning into its own slow collapse. How brief our present seems in this unfolding. How quickly the world begins to shape itself again. And so, in this imagining, humanity has vanished tomorrow, not with finality, but with a quiet breath. And Earth. Earth continues, as it always has, through silence, through motion, through the endless patience of time. The second section of the journey drifts toward the stillness of cities. They remain, empty and waiting, like shells left on a shore after the tide has gone. Tower blocks rise, glass panes reflect the morning sun, steel beams hold their places. For a while, these shapes persist, confident, as if nothing has changed. But the silence inside them tells another story. The air circulates differently now. No fans hum, no elevators shift, no doors swing open to release a tide of footsteps. The great machines of climate control, once steady as heartbeat, go quiet. In their place, only the whisper of wind slips through broken seals in windows, only the gentle breath of dust rising and falling in the light. Steel is strong, but it remembers its fragility when water finds it. The smallest leak in a roof, the tiniest crack in a seam, allows rain to slip inside. In the first year, moisture gathers. In 10 years, it gnaws at beams. In 100, the skeleton of a skyscraper bends beneath its own slow sickness. Glass shatters not in explosions, but in single size, panels falling to the earth one by one. Concrete, too, begins its transformation. To the human eye it once seemed permanent, immovable. Yet within, tiny fissures wait. Rain, frost, and heat find these openings and widen them. In time, concrete flakes, crumbles, returns to dust and stone. A bridge stands across a river for decades, perhaps centuries, but one day its pillars sink, and water flows unresisted again. How long, then, does the skyline last? How many centuries before towers are no more than mounds of steel and rubble, softened beneath ivy and soil? Some estimates suggest only a few hundred years for collapse to take its hold. Others wonder whether certain ruins might persist for thousands, silent echoes of a species long gone. Yet all agree that permanence is an illusion, and time will have its way. Wind is patient, rain is patient, roots are patient. Where we built walls, they find entry. Where we smoothed surfaces, they leave fractures. Where we tried to stand taller than the forests, they climb us, wrapping steel with green. Inside the towers, animals wander. Birds find rafters. Owls take shelter in forgotten attics. Rodents scurry through offices, scattering papers that no one reads. A desk still holds pens, a cup of dust, a chair facing a view, the shape of a life once lived, now only a stage for insects and silence. Streets below gather layers of leaves, branches, debris. In the absence of sweeping, drains clog. Rainwater pools, then floods. Asphalt cracks, surrendering to grasses, then saplings, then trees. 100 years may pass before the avenue resembles a forest path again, lined not by street lamps, but by trunks of ash and maple. Time feels different in these empty places. A decade is a breath, a century a sigh. Human time, once measured in seconds, appointments, deadlines, collapses now into the slower rhythm of decay and regrowth. The earth does not hurry. Perhaps in imagining these empty cities, one feels both sadness and wonder. Sadness at what is lost. The voices, the warmth, the lives within those walls. Wonder at what returns. The plants, the animals, the waters flowing free. Do the stones remember us? Do the towers, as they fall, whisper that once they were, raised by hands that dreamed of permanence? Or does the world forget quickly, like sand washing smooth after footprints fade? The image lingers. Skylines, silent, waiting, dissolving. In the distance, forests creep nearer. In the river, fish swim, where ferries once crossed. In the sky, stars shine brighter over the hushed glow of what once was a city. The silence of cities deepens, and slowly the breath of vegetation begins to move. First as small, almost invisible gestures. A tendril curling at the edge of a window frame, moss spreading on damp stone, a single sapling rising from the seam of a cracked sidewalk. What begins as fragile becomes inevitable. The green world, patient and unhurried, begins to reclaim what was borrowed from it. Seeds lie everywhere, waiting. Many have waited already for years, embedded in soil beneath the pavements, carried in the feathers of birds blown across asphalt by stray winds. Without human feet trampling them down, without gardeners pulling them out, they find their chance. Dandelions lift their heads through fractures in concrete. Clover spreads in patterns where lawns once stood trimmed. A willow finds the damp seam of a sewer and follows it. The rhythm of this return is almost imperceptible at first. A week, a month, a year, only the smallest signs of change. But let decades pass and the difference becomes undeniable. Ivy drapes down brick walls in cascading curtains. Roots swell, splitting foundations, widening cracks, displacing stones. Rooftops that once held antennas and satellite dishes now cradle birches, their seeds carried upward by birds. In this new silence, the very architecture of human presence becomes scaffolding for forest. Forests have always been opportunists flowing like water into spaces left open. Suburbs, with their lawns and gardens, provide soft ground ready to be retaken. Fruit trees, planted by human hands, continue for a while, their apples and pears scattering seeds into the soil. Some persist, others vanish as wilder, sturdier. Species take root. Over centuries, the edges blur until orchard and woodland are one. Grasslands, too, expand where farmland once stretched in monocultured rows. Wheat fields untended grow feral, their neat lines dissolving into chaos. Corn, without careful cultivation, falters after a few generations, but rye and oats survive, longer, scattering themselves into the wind, mingling with the native wildflowers. And through these fields, animals wander freely again, dispersing seeds with every step. The air itself carries green forward. Pollen drifts through doorways left ajar. Fern spores land in the damp corners of basements. Slowly, carefully, each space becomes a niche, a cradle for growth. Even the tallest towers are not immune. Winds lift seeds high into the sky, depositing them in crevices where dust has gathered, where rainwater lingers. There, high above the streets, the first roots take hold, and branches spread in open air, and water helps. Without pumps and drainage systems, canals overflow. Rivers swell into their forgotten floodplains. Swamps form in the low places of cities. Lilies bloom where intersections once guided traffic. Reeds rise, frogs gather, dragonflies dance in air now unbothered by engines. The rhythm is not uniform. In deserts, change is slower. Sand reclaims what it covers, burying ruins rather than weaving them with roots. In tundra, moss and lichen spread gradually across abandoned cabins. In tropics, however, transformation is swift and exuberant. Vines race upward, trees root in walls, whole forests reclaim the skeletons of buildings in decades rather than centuries. This vision, the earth does not hurry, yet it never stops. Every seed, every root, every drifting spore participates in the slow undoing of our structures. Green does not ask permission. It simply grows, filling the silence we leave behind. And so one imagines walking, centuries later, through what was once a city square. Trees rise where fountains once stood. Owls nest in the hollowed remains of a traffic light. The air smells of wet soil, not of fuel. The pavement beneath your feet is broken, but soft, covered in moss and roots. And everywhere, the breath of vegetation moves like a tide, patient, unstoppable, eternal. Animal footsteps begin to map the emptiness. Hoof prints appear first in the dust that settles across lobby marble and station platforms, delicate crescents splayed in patterns that once would have startled a crowd. The doors do not open for them, but time does. A hinge rusts, a pane falls, a gate slips from its track, and there is an opening. Light angles through it, a ribbon across the floor, and a deer steps into the cool shade where ticket counters gather their quiet. The air inside smells of paper and old rain. The deer listens, hears only the slow expansion and contraction of the building, and moves on. Foxes learn this geography quickly. They move as if remembering a story the city told long ago. Shortcuts under stairwells, dry passage along maintenance corridors, quiet nests tucked behind warm machinery that now sleeps forever. Their paws leave soft stars on layers of dust, and pollen, zigzagging from doorway to doorway. In the absence of engines, their ears fill with subtler music, the wing buzz of beetles in atriums, the water note of leaks dropping from roof to floor, the distant scrabble of a rat testing a new seam in the wall. They pause at thresholds as they always have, weighing risk against curiosity, then pass inside, tails like brushes painting the space between shadow and light. Birds, untroubled by schedules, begin to revise the skyline into a cliff face. Where glass remains, they rest on ledges that mimic sea stacks. Where panes have fallen, they pass through into atriums now warmed by sun and thick with echo. Swifts and swallows coil their flights through the empty volumes, stitching air with invisible thread, while owls learn the stillness of reading rooms and the patient hush of museum halls. A peregrine nests on a concrete cornice and opens her wings over an avenue that already blurs, hunting pigeons that still know every roofline. With the lights gone, the sky returns. No glare softens the stars. Migrants follow constellations as their ancestors did, their roots no longer bent by brilliance. The great glass traps of night, once fatal, release their hold, and bird paths straighten like rivers reclaimed. In parks and medians, the first grazers widen the edges. Hares nibble clover where tires once pressed rubber into stone. Boar root through lawns, turning soil as if plowing had never ended, uncovering bulbs, loosening seed banks. In colder places, elk step through roundabouts as if threading a glade, their breath white in the morning air. In warmer regions, antelope pick their way along old canal banks, listening to reeds hiss. Predators follow the green tide with their own patient arithmetic. Coyotes that once learned traffic patterns now inherit silent thoroughfares, their paths stretched farther, their days no longer bound to twilight alone. In Europe and Asia, wolves test the edges of sleeping suburbs, scenting corridors where hedges once were trimmed and fences latched. The corridors widen, then connect. Railway lines become hedgerows of sapling trees. Power easements, no longer mowed, become riverine strips of milkweed and dogwood. Rivers themselves, freed from their armored banks by the failure of pumps and steady neglect, spread into their forgotten curves, braiding meadows of willow in their wake. The city turns into a mosaic where animals read the joins the way prose finds its commas. Within these joins, the daily etiquette of noise and light rewrites itself. Songbirds ease their voices downward in pitch, no longer needing to cut through the metal hiss of morning. Calls stretch, elaborate, relax. Frogs claim intersections that puddle after storms. Crickets stitch the night together until dawn, and then until dusk again, their steady pulse another kind of clock. The absence of sirens leaves space for new rhythms to surface. the wing slap of a heron climbing from a canal, the knock of a woodpecker on a rotting billboard, the soft clatter of shells as mussels settle on the pylons of a quiet bridge. Even bats adjust. Without floodlit fields and neon, they trace the old patterns of moon and river, taking insects from air that grows thick again with mayflies and moths. Not all animals flourish in the same way. Some who lived by our scraps, our overflowing bins and scattered meals, fade back into the larger hungers of landscape. Raccoons, sketched for generations in the vocabulary of alleyways, begin to write themselves in forests again. Their fingers, wet with stream water instead of grease. Urban gulls, once fed by parking lot winds, follow the lure of estuaries and open coast. Rats remain, but their populations pulse differently, tied now to seasons and predators more than to pantry doors. Scavengers remain too, crows, foxes, beetles, but their table is set by tides and weather rather than by schedules. The food web breathes in, then out, exploring its new shape. Inside buildings, colonies establish. Pigeons take rafters. Starlings find vents and sing to the hollow tin. Kestrels perch on the bones of ceiling trusses and watch. Bats gather like folded velvet in vaulted ceilings and in the cool caves of parking garages. Swifts claim chimneys that no longer smoke. Squirrels arrange drifts of paper for nests, the inked fragments of forgotten projects lining a cradle for the next generation. In the dark of subways, salamanders discover constant damp and settle into a life of uninterrupted stillness, while above, on rooftops, birches nurse robins and sparrows beneath their new leaves. What we called interior becomes another kind of edge habitat, full of ledges, cavities, and calm. Water organizes gatherings in its slow, persuasive way. Where fountains once rose on timers, algae mats spread. Turtles climb the steps and bask. On the flat stones of memorials, carp explore the echoing mouths of culverts. Beavers return to feeder streams that thread the neighborhoods, their teeth taking poplar and willow, their dams raising wetlands where basements flood and streets decline into reeds. With impoundments and pipes failing elsewhere, river temperatures shift, sediment loads change, and new fish move in, testing reaches they had not entered for a century. Kingfishers arrive like darts and punctuate the calm with sudden blue. In some places, the adaptation carries the flavor of long familiarity. In cities once home to macaques and langurs, primates cross balconies and courtyards as if the human distance between trees had only been a temporary inconvenience. They find fruit from old gardens, leaves from volunteer trees, water from leaky roofs. Parakeets chatter among antennas turned perches. On other continents, marsupials unfold their nocturnes through suburbs that grow less suburban by the year, stepping off now abandoned decks as if they were shelves of limestone. Pathways multiply. The raised spine of a highway, softened with soil and scrub, becomes a ridge route for deer and fox. The green trench of an old canal pulls otters from one basin to another. Disused tram lines guide hedgehogs whose small, low wanderings now meet fewer borders. Even fences refuse their old duty. The wires rust, the boards loosen, and the animal world rethreads the map with hundreds of tiny decisions, each a step, each a look, each a listening. There is room in this quiet for a slower kind of intelligence to show itself, not the solving of puzzles, but the long noticing. A crow remembers the window on the 12th floor that always opened with lunch. Now it learns the updraft there, uses it to rise. A fox learns which staircases frost first. An elk learns where wind pools the smell of wolves and avoids that hollow when the moon is thin. Patterns accrete. Habits deepen. A city that once demanded attention with billboards and lights now asks for a different attention, to wind seams and shade pools, to fruit set and thaw, to where the feral apples drop and when. In the quiet, after we vanish, an old conversation resumes. It speaks in scratch and wing, in the shiver of grass and the riffle of fish. It speaks in paths worn again through places we thought were only ours. It does not hurry. It does not scold. It simply goes on and on and on, writing its patient sentences across the vacant rooms of our making, until those rooms are no longer rooms, but hollows in a forest, and then only forest, and then only time. Night arrives, and for the first time in a long while, it is allowed to be night. The fading of lights begins as a ripple that crosses continents with the turning of the earth, not abrupt, not theatrical, but like breath slowly let out. In the first hours after human hands vanish, the grid still hums in places. Turbines spin, reservoirs hold their pressure, solar farms sleep and promise to wake. But the promise requires attention, and attention does not come. Power knows the shape of habit. It expects coal delivered to hoppers, gas pushed along pipelines by compressors, control rooms watched by eyes. It expects frequency held to a narrow band so that thousands of machines can keep in step. When nothing adjusts a valve or answers an alarm, systems protect themselves the way living things sometimes do. They shut down. A generator trips. A station isolates. Lines that carried the pulse of a continent fall silent in a cascade of small, automatic decisions until the silence is the norm. Some lights linger. Batteries in hospitals drink down their charge with patience measured in hours. Diesel tanks. Feed engines that purr for a day, a week, and then cough empty. Hydropower persists in certain valleys. Water flowing because water must. Turbines turning until a gate sticks or a bearing runs warm for just a little too long. Offshore, a solitary flare may knit a small flame to the wind a little while longer, then wink into dark. Lighthouses, beacons on the edges of our maps, blink through their backup cycles, then join the sea in its unlit breathing. The change seen from above would be simple. The bright archipelagos of city after city, once islands, in a manufactured dawn, are replaced by darkness that swallows their edges. The world's night gleam, that faint planetary lantern, dims to a handful of stubborn embers at dams and buoys and lonely towers that still remember the feel of current. Even these will go, and then the planet turns a face to space that is mostly water and cloud and land, without the frost of new light at the seams. The sky, freed from our glow, grows thick again with stars. Not more stars than before. They have always been there, but more visible, more insistent. The Milky Way pours over rooftops like a river, a band of breath pale and granular, its darknesses as eloquent as its lights. The constellations, artifacts of human naming, keep their shapes, but the background becomes astonishing. Uncountable points, a brightness that is not bright, a fullness that is not heavy. In the deepest rural nights of the Old World, similar skies were still possible. Now they spread over places that had not seen them in generations. The dome of illumination that once crowned a city no longer drives a false twilight 50 miles into the countryside. The boundary is simply night. This darkness is not empty. It comes with textures that the body recognizes. Air glow, that soft planetary exhalation, becomes noticeable. A greenish veil from atoms high above. The zodiacal light returns as a slanted brushstroke before dawn, dust along the plane of the solar system catching sunlight from below the horizon. Where storms walk the ocean, lightning stitches horizon to cloud with silent, silver geometry. In polar latitudes, auroras unfurl without competition, curtains and spirals playing across magnetic lines, their colors allowed to be subtle again, their edges allowed to be velvet. The lives that share the night respond. Songbirds, whose voices had grown sharper and louder to compete with the human day's noise, soften their calls. Their timing slides more freely with the arc of sunrise. Nocturnal insects, no longer pulled into lethal halos of white bulbs, spread, their dances across meadows instead of parking lots, and the web of energy that once gathered around a street lamp disperses into 1,000 small feasts where bats and nightjars feed. Sea turtle hatchlings, guided by horizon they can now trust, move toward ocean rather than boulevard. Moths find moon and meadow, not glass and glare. Migrating birds trace star patterns without crossing rivers of light that once confused their internal maps. Even plankton in coastal waters adjust, their vertical migrations cued again by natural dark. In the human-built places, the darkness creeps inward. Apartment windows do not glow with tiny rectangles. Billboards do not breathe neon. Stadiums cease to cast their false daylight onto neighborhoods hours after the last voice would have left. The interior's small illuminations, alarms, chargers, standby dots die by attrition. Elevator panels go dull, exit signs flicker and fade. The city's image, once reflected into the sky by even overcast cloud ceilings, narrows to lightning flashes and the persistent, unhurried shimmer of stars, passing between tower ribs where glass has fallen away. There are little exceptions, scattered like late leaves on a winter branch. Solar-powered road signs store daylight in their chemistry and return it carefully, night after night, until grime and shadow film and weather slowly steal their capacity. Navigation buoys blink at sea for seasons, their panels rinsed by rain, their batteries giving, receiving, giving, and then less. On certain satellites, algorithms continue to issue tiny corrections until their tanks run dry. Above, they appear as pale pinpricks drifting along well-worn paths. Then, given time, they fail and fall, invisible in their final unspooling. Somewhere, a museum's emergency light survives longer than expected in a basement that stays, cool and dry. Somewhere, a tunnel gleams in intervals the way a memory does. Real, but increasingly rare. It grows truly dark in a way that enlarges the world rather than diminishes it. Edges soften, distances lengthen. The pupil widens. The skin learns to read air. The mind, relieved of overabundance, notices the slow things. The glow on the horizon becomes moonrise instead of city. The sky acquires a language of its own, one that was always there. The slow, seasonal drift of constellations, the bright wanderings of planets, the occasional long, silent fire of a meteor that burns its brief sentence into the mind and then is gone. The question arises gently. How dark does the planet become at night? Dark enough that the galaxy's structure is visible to landlocked eyes, dark enough that shadows return to starlight, dark enough that a person standing in an empty street can walk by the luminance of snow, or of pale rock, or the soft sheet of a river and not be lost. Dark enough that animals reshape their hours not because of fear, but because the original melody of night and day plays without accompaniment. Darkness, too, is an ecology. What had been eroded by perpetual glow, slowly, grows back. Firefly signals, once drowned in the wash of human light, become legible. Mate finding improves in fields that no longer glitter with unhelpful stars at ground level. Predation patterns adjust where prey had been pinned in place by illumination. Flowers that open to moths find their partners again. The clock genes, in bodies, bird, insect, mammal, human, fall more cleanly into step with the sky's cues. In that alignment, there is less hurry. There is also less confusion. The built world changes its attitude under this new sky. It becomes more like geology. Towers are silhouettes. Bridges are low constellations of black over darker water. Roads are paler ribbons where dust takes light better than grass. Windows that once were eyes become fossils of sight. The city, under starlight, resembles an old seabed. Ridges and flats, scattered plates and bones, the pattern of a life that was once dense and loud, now quiet and waiting for moss. What illumination remains comes from biologies. The cool fox eyeshine in a beam of moon, the luminous plankton that ignite a wave's curl, the small lanterns of fungi and damp woods growing up through a cracked courtyard. Somewhere, far at sea, a dark ship hull moves under a sky so crowded with stars that it seems day-like in its abundance, though the light is thin and ghost-colored. The ship has no lamps anymore. The ocean holds it and does not remark upon this. And so, night returns, to a depth that is not emptiness, but fullness. The planet's face rests. The sky is once again a book open to every reader with patience and time. In that regained darkness, pain eases, stories drift, the mind loosens its knots. The world sleeps without the hum, and in sleeping, it remembers how to breathe. The oceans begin their slow encroachment. Without pumps, without seawalls tended and reinforced, without dredgers to clear the mouths of harbors, water returns to the shape it has always wanted. It does not hurry, but neither does it pause. Along the coasts, tides breathe with ancient rhythm. For centuries, people had set barriers against them. Concrete seawalls, levees, pumps, channels dug straight where rivers once meandered. Left unattended, each of these begins to fail. Storm. Surges rise higher than gates that do not close. Salt water creeps under barriers meant to resist it. Foundations sink as sand shifts, unrestrained by human geometry. A boardwalk collapses in sections, eaten not by a single wave, but by the persistence of thousands. Ports, once heavy with steel and light, become quiet basins. Ships rust at their moorings until they sink, leaving outlines that attract barnacles and mussels, then coral, then fish. What was built for commerce becomes reef, sheltering parrotfish, groupers, crabs, and eels. Dolphins swim where trucks once. Backed to loading docks, the tides climb staircases and seep into warehouses, leaving salt crystals like lace upon the walls. Cities at sea's edge transform faster than those inland. Underground tunnels flood within months. Basements fill with brackish water that ebbs and returns, a pulse of the moon. Crocodiles and caimans slip into floodplains where suburbs dissolve. Mangroves advance into boulevards, their roots weaving knots through the old asphalt, building soil from the ruins of parking lots. Beaches shift shape, reclaiming ground once pinned by piers and bulkheads. Sand slides where it wishes, pulled by waves, rebuilt grain by grain. A lighthouse, unlit now, stands alone in surf that chews at its foundation. Perhaps it lasts a century, perhaps two. One day it tips, a slow fall, and joins the stones. Further inland, rivers too remember their freedom. Embankments no longer maintained crumble. Floodplains spread. What once was controlled becomes meander. Cities built along rivers face their undoing. Streets vanish beneath silt, then reeds, then oxbow lakes filled with lilies. Alligators, carp, herons, and dragonflies weave the new corridors. The oceans rise not only from erosion, but from the deep climate's pulse. Ice sheets, already melting before our disappearance, continue their long retreat. Greenland sighs icebergs into the sea. Antarctica, slow but relentless, lifts ocean levels higher century by century. Coastlines redraw themselves with quiet certainty. How does the earth feel as water returns? Does the ocean celebrate its widening? Or does it simply follow physics, gravity, and heat, unconcerned with memory? 10,000 years stretch long enough for continents to reshape at their margins. What was once New York may be marshland, rich with reeds and herons, then shallow bay where oysters filter the tides. London becomes estuary, Paris inland delta, Miami reef. Venice, already fragile, dissolves into lagoon long before the others, and yet this is not destruction. It is transformation. Water takes back what stone and steel tried to hold. It does not destroy the coast, it reimagines it. Where there were avenues, there are estuaries. Where there were markets, there are shoals. Where there were towers, There are tide pools. Imagine walking, far in the future, along the edge of such a shore. Beneath your feet are shells, sand, fragments of pottery softened by salt. In the shallows, fish dart between the ribs of a drowned bridge. The sun sets, and the tide advances, whispering against the land as it always has. The sound is not new, only remembered, an old conversation between water and earth, spoken once more without interruption. The ocean creeps inland, but gently, without malice. It follows its patient law, filling space, shaping coast, erasing line. And, in its presence, the world finds a new rhythm, as tides and time compose a coastline written not in permanence, but in endless change. The collapse of monuments comes slowly, almost reverently, as if time places a soft hand upon each structure and reminds it of gravity. Bridges, statues, towers, each once raised as a gesture of permanence, discover their impermanence. Steel bridges stand for decades after human footsteps vanish. Their cables, stretched taut, hum quietly in the wind. Rain beads on their surfaces, seeps into seams, finds places where paint has worn thin. Rust blossoms like lichen, spreading year by year. A century passes and cables weaken, one strand after another giving way with a muffled snap. Decks buckle, arches tilt. Eventually, the structure folds into the river below, becoming part of the channel it once spanned. Fish dart among beams. Sediment buries the rest. Statues, too, begin their slow surrender. Bronze darkens, then weathers to green, then flakes in, thin layers. Marble, once polished and luminous, absorbs the rain. Acid, carried in clouds, carves features into blur. The lines of faces soften. Eyes sink into shadow. In time, fingers break, noses crumble, whole limbs fall. The pedestal cracks, shifts, tips. The monument returns to rubble, indistinguishable from the stones of the earth. Some stand longer. The pyramids, already ancient, endure for thousands more years. Their edges soften as desert winds grind their surfaces. Sand piles against their flanks, but their mass holds. They wait, as they always have, as markers of a species who once sought eternity in stone. Mount Rushmore, carved into granite, resists at first. Rain, frost, and thaw fracture its surfaces. After a few million years, not 10,000, not 100,000, but far longer, the faces fade, their outlines melting into the mountain's natural curves. The stone reclaims its own identity, erasing the portraits back into cliff and talus. Even the tallest towers, built of steel and glass, fall quickly compared with mountains. A skyscraper may remain upright for a century or two, but corrosion and storms eventually tear its skin away. Floors collapse inward like pages closing. The skeleton twists, then settles in a heap of rust and broken glass. Ivy drapes across the ruin. Trees rise through its hollow center, until one day there is no tower, only a mound beneath the canopy. What is it that monuments mean without eyes to see them? Without memory to attach them to story, they are only shapes in the landscape. An arch spanning a valley becomes cliff. A column in a field becomes stone. The intention behind them, the pride, the reverence, the mourning, dissolves. What remains is material, returning to the cycles of earth. Perhaps that is the deeper truth of permanence. Not in the object, but in the process. No monument endures as itself forever, but each contributes its dust, its metal, its molecules, back into the ongoing experiment of life. Bronze flake becomes soil. Stone shard becomes sediment. Steel fragment sinks to seabed, mineral for future rock. 10,000 years without us, the earth holds few traces of our gestures toward eternity. A hill conceals the bones of a stadium. A forest grows around a fractured obelisk. The desert hides a broken sphinx beneath drifts of sand, and above them all, wind and rain continue their ceaseless sculpting, indifferent, patient, soft. Imagine wandering through such a place. You find a ridge of stone, half carved, half eroded. You do not know whether it was monument or mountain. The difference is no longer important. What matters is the silence, the weight of time pressing evenly, smoothing, reshaping, until all becomes landscape again. The collapse of monuments is not a tragedy. It is a return to balance, to anonymity, to the vast patience of geology. What we raised falls, and in falling, becomes part of the earth once more. Seeds on the wind drift endlessly, carried by currents that do not care for borders. Long before people vanished, seeds traveled in fur and feather, in river drift and ocean swell. Yet in our presence, their paths were shaped, encouraged, or blocked. Some plants spread because we desired them. Wheat, rice, maize. Others journeyed because we moved them without knowing. Burrs on clothing, spores in cargo holds. When humanity disappears, the wind resumes its ancient work without our interference. A grain of dandelion fluff lifts from the cracked asphalt of a forgotten playground. It drifts into sunlight, sails across rusting fences, and lands in soil softened by rain. Roots press downward, leaves open. In a year, a new puffball releases 100 more seeds into the breeze. Within decades, yellow blossoms scatter across what was once a schoolyard. In fields where we once grew crops, the story unfolds differently. Corn, reliant on human hands, struggles. Its kernels, tightly bound and heavy, fall but rarely sprout. Within a few generations, maize fades, replaced by wild grasses and opportunistic herbs. Wheat and barley, more flexible, linger longer. They scatter seed without the need for harvesters, yet without tending, they too fall into competition with sturdier weeds. Only the hardiest remnants remain, absorbed into the wild tapestry. Fruit trees tell another tale. Apple, pear, cherry. These continue, at least for centuries. Birds carry seeds in their bellies. Deer eat fallen fruit and scatter pits in their wanderings. Some orchards persist, feral but alive, offering their sweetness to any creature who passes. Over time, though, they too are outcompeted by forests pressing in from the edges. Their trunks rot, their branches fall, and the canopy of oak, maple, or pine closes over them. In warmer climates, bananas collapse without their gardeners. Most cannot reproduce without cuttings. Within a generation, they vanish, leaving only their ghosts in soil enriched by their decay. Rice fields dry, become marsh, and then meadow. Coffee, tea, and vineyard grapes retreat into isolated patches, merging again with the wild species from which they once came. Yet, not everything fades. Some of our introductions persist stubbornly, even flourish. Kudzu surges across abandoned suburbs, its vines layering roofs, swallowing cars, turning entire neighborhoods into green mounds. Ivy clings to walls until the walls themselves collapse beneath its weight. Eucalyptus, planted far from its native lands, grows tall and fast, changing the fire cycles of entire landscapes. These plants, once spread by our design, continue to shape ecosystems long after our disappearance. Seeds ride farther than sight. Cottonwood fluff floats miles on the breeze. Milkweed parachutes scatter across river valleys. Coconut drifts upon the ocean for weeks, landing on a shore it has never known, sprouting into a tree that will one day drop more coconuts, each one a vessel for the same long voyage. Insects carry seeds, too. Ants pull them underground, guided by the taste of oils that coat them. Forgotten gardens become dense with wildflowers seeded by such quiet labor. Bees, though fewer without human cultivation, still ferry pollen from blossom to blossom, helping the cycle turn. Imagine the passage of centuries. A highway once stretched straight across a plain. Now it is no more than a faint ridge in the soil, lined with stands of birch whose seeds first landed in the smallest cracks. Along its edge, meadows of asters and goldenrod bloom, born from seeds scattered by wind and wing. Deer feed, birds nest, insects hum. The road is gone, but the line it left has become a corridor of life. Seeds on the wind do not remember us. They do not care where they fall, only that they fall. Their persistence writes a story older than humanity, and one that continues long after. Every forest that spreads, every meadow that rises, every marsh that thickens is a chapter in that endless narrative of motion, dispersal, arrival. And so the question lingers. In 10,000 years, which plants will still carry our trace? Will apple groves persist, echoing the hands that once tended them? Or will all traces of cultivation dissolve, leaving only wildness, only the anonymous green tide that moves wherever the wind commands? For now, the seeds drift. They wait in soil. They rise. They fall again. The wind carries them, patient and unending. Concrete lies across the earth like a skin, spread in roads, runways, bridges, and dams. At first, it appears solid, unwavering, resistant to time. Yet even as it hardens, it carries within itself the seeds of its own undoing. Tiny fissures form when water seeps in, when heat expands and cold contracts, when roots push with quiet persistence. Without repair, those fissures widen. Concrete, like all things, begins to crumble. Highways endure the longest in arid places, where rain is scarce and frost rare. But even there, sand drifts across the surface, burying lanes beneath dunes. Wind-polished grains scour the asphalt, exposing the aggregate beneath. Where the desert breathes, roads vanish not through collapse, but through burial. 1,000 years later, a highway is no more than a faint ridge beneath the shifting sands. In wetter climates, nature works faster. Rain pools in potholes, growing deeper with each season. Roots invade from the sides, cracking edges, lifting slabs. Moss darkens the surface, then grasses take root. A century passes, and the black ribbon of asphalt is a meadow. From above, the road remains as a faint line of altered soil, but on the ground it has become field, alive with crickets and butterflies. Runways, once smooth expanses, break even sooner. Without constant mowing, weeds pierce through seams. Saplings rise, spaced evenly at first, like soldiers on parade. Then forests gather, shading the tarmac, sheltering deer and foxes who wander across the long straightaways. What once launched machines into the sky becomes a corridor for wings of another kind. Hawks circling, swallows darting. Bridges, those elegant arcs across rivers and valleys, weaken as their supports erode. Water undercuts foundations. Roots pry into cracks. Without human hands to seal and mend, joints fail. Sections tilt, fall, vanish into current. A broken span becomes an island of stone, moss-covered, visited by kingfishers and otters. Fish swim between pillars that no longer carry weight. The bridge's purpose dissolves, but the remnants become part of the living river. Dams stand longer, their immense weight holding back lakes that no one uses. For decades, perhaps centuries, the reservoirs remain, silent mirrors stretching across valleys. Yet water is persistent. It seeps through seams, trickles into bedrock, gnaws at foundations. In time, a dam fails, suddenly or slowly, and the river reclaims its path. Downstream, silt spreads, new channels braid, wetlands form. Life rushes. In with the water. Reeds, frogs, herons, willows, the valley reshapes itself as if the wall had never stood. Concrete towers, silos, parking garages crumble floor by floor. The rebar within rusts, swelling. cracking the stone around it. Columns lean, slabs fall, echoes fade into dust. In tropical regions, vines accelerate the process. Roots wedge themselves into joints, their growth prying blocks apart. In the north, freeze and thaw hammer the surfaces year after year. Everywhere, time pulls the material back into gravel, sand, dust. Even where it crumbles, traces remain. Archaeologists of a far future, human or otherwise, might find strange ridges of gravel running across landscapes. They may dig into layers of soil and discover the ghost outlines of freeways. Beneath forests, they may stumble on concrete footings, oddly aligned, fragments of a geometry no longer understood. The persistence of concrete is paradoxical. It is both fragile and enduring. Fragile in that its function disappears within centuries. Enduring in that fragments, dust, and chemical signatures may last tens of thousands of years. Limestone altered, sand fused, pebbles bound. These remain in strata, markers of a species that once poured mountains into molds. The echo of roads and runways may persist as faint scars visible only from the air. The echo of dams may remain, as silt-filled basins that differ from natural lakes. Yet, to the forest, to the river, to the meadow, these are not scars. They are simply ground to grow upon. Imagine standing on what was once a great highway, 10,000 years from now. Trees rise in rows along its former edge, their roots feeding on the softened stone. A stream trickles across, carving a shallow channel. Deer trails cross at angles. No straight lines remain, only curves, only meanders, only the memory of concrete. Dissolving back into earth, echoes in concrete fade, but they do not vanish entirely. They become part of the story of soil, sediment, and rock. They speak quietly, in fragments and dust, reminding the earth of the brief era when humans reshaped its surface in lines and grids. An era that, like all others, flows onward into silence. The wild begins to return with a patience that feels inevitable. Where our presence once narrowed its corridors, fenced its ranges, and clipped its wings, wilderness now flows outward, as though exhaling after a long pause. Forests are first to move. They wait only for the absence of the mower, the saw, the plow. In suburbs, saplings that sprouted between fences rise without restraint. Oaks and maples send roots beneath sidewalks, pushing slabs into uneven mosaics. Pines grow through collapsed roofs. Birches line the edges of highways, their pale, trunks shining in moonlight, drawing foxes to shelter in their shade. Within centuries, the outlines of whole neighborhoods blur, smoothed into green canopies. Grasslands recover more slowly, for they need space, fire, and grazing herds. Yet, in the absence of tractors and fences, prairie grasses inch outward again. Bluestem, switchgrass, and buffalo grass reclaim old fields, their roots driving meters deep, breaking apart compacted soils. Herds return where corridors open, bison in plains once cut by roads, antelope moving again across plateaus. Predators follow, reshaping balance, weaving old patterns of hunt and flight into the land. Deserts, too, change, though their silence is less dramatic. Where we once drew water for cities, rivers trickle back into their natural beds. Salt flats regain their brilliance under sun, no longer scarred by vehicles. Cacti and mesquite spread across ghost towns, their thorns catching dust and seeds. Lizards bask on the ruins of gas stations. Rattlesnakes curl in the cool shadow of fallen beams. The desert does not rush. It only endures. Wetlands spread into lowlands once drained for agriculture. Without pumps, without dredging, water reclaims its natural rhythm. Marshes form where fields once grew rice and corn. Reeds sway, dragonflies shimmer, herons lift in slow arcs across the shallows. Frogs multiply in pools that gather where streets once directed rain into storm drains. Each amphibian call stitches the new night with sound. The oceanic wild also expands. With ships idle and nets absent, fish stocks recover. Coral reefs, though scarred by warming seas, are given space to mend. Without sonar and propellers, the ocean grows quieter. Whales sing into that silence, their voices carrying farther, reaching. Companions across entire basins. Turtles lay eggs on beaches free of light and footsteps. Mangroves claim coastlines as storm barriers fail, creating labyrinths of roots where fish spawn and shelter. Mountains stand largely unchanged, though their slopes grow wilder still. Ski lifts rust into silence, their cables draped with lichens. Grasses reclaim ski runs. Goats and snow leopards wander without disturbance. Glacial valleys deepen as ice melts and reforms in cycles far beyond our absence. The wild returns not only in space, but in rhythm. Migratory routes reopen as fences decay. Caribou follow old trails across tundra. Elephants push through overgrown villages, their paths leading to waterholes they once abandoned. Wolves redraw the boundaries of forests, their howls echoing where streetlights once hummed. The balance between predator and prey reestablishes itself, not through design, but through time. Some places transform faster than others. In tropical zones, vines consume entire skylines within decades, wrapping towers into green cliffs. In boreal forests, centuries pass before pines advance into clearings. In tundra, mosses and lichens knit slowly over airstrips and barracks. Yet everywhere, the wild persists. Its pace is uneven, but its presence constant. There are questions that linger in this rewilding. Does the earth miss our tending? Do abandoned orchards mourn the hands that once pruned them? Or is the wild indifferent, grateful only for silence? Perhaps both. Perhaps the memory of our care is folded gently into the new forests, the new meadows, carried forward in the persistence of species that once depended on us. Imagine walking, far into this future, through what was once a farmland, plain. Instead of fields in straight rows, you find a rolling expanse of grass, waves of seed heads moving with the wind. Herds graze, birds rise in flocks, predators wait at the edges. The sky above is vast, unbroken by wires. The horizon is alive, unbounded. The wild returns not with haste, not with anger, but with patience. It fills absence with presence, silence with song. 10,000 years without us, the earth is not barren of life. It is thick with it, tangled with it, radiant with it. The wilderness is not a memory restored. It is a future, always waiting, always ready to breathe again. Domesticated strays wander the empty world. For millennia, they have lived beside humans, shaped by us, shaped for us, their survival tied to our shelters and our food. When humanity vanishes, they inherit an uncertain freedom. Some thrive, others fade. All must decide how to live in a world no longer arranged around their needs. Dogs wait first. In houses, apartments, barns, they linger for days, for weeks, noses pressed to doors that never open. Some starve in silence, others break through windows, dig under fences, leap from balconies in desperation. Their ancestors once roamed wild, and a few remember how to forage. Small breeds struggle most, their bodies too delicate, their instincts dulled. Larger dogs, wolves in distant memory, fare better. Packs form in suburbs, blending breeds into mongrels closer in shape to their ancient kin. They hunt deer, scavenge carcasses, raid nests. Over generations, ears sharpen, coats thicken. Or thin to match the climate, legs lengthen, muzzles narrow. Within centuries, the dog as pet dissolves into the dog as predator, the dog as wild companion to the new wilderness. Cats slip into the silence more easily. Already independent, they turn swiftly to the hunt. Barn cats multiply in fields, alley, cats in forests. They stalk rodents in warehouses, birds in forests, lizards in deserts. Some vanish in climates too harsh, but others thrive, their lithe bodies weaving through the ruins with ease. Over centuries, feral cats spread wider, their forms shifting toward local needs. Thick coats in the cold, lean frames in the tropics, colors blending into undergrowth. Their voices soften, their eyes sharpen, until they too are no longer pets, but wild. Livestock face harsher fates. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats depend on our fences, our food, our protection. In open fields, predators return. Wolves test herds. Lions in Africa reclaim ranges that humans once cut away. Some livestock perish quickly, their bodies feeding the soil and the scavengers. Others adapt, forming feral herds. Cattle in grasslands grow leaner, swifter. Pigs return to forests rooting in soil, their tusks lengthening again. Goats climb cliffs, nibbling scrub, surviving as their ancestors did. Sheep, shorn of human guardianship, fade in many places, their wool heavy, their bodies slow. Only those in rugged landscapes persist, blending back into the wilderness. Chickens scatter across farms, roosting in trees, scratching in soil. Many fall to foxes and hawks, but some persist in warm regions, wild flocks resembling once more their jungle-fowl kin. Horses fare better. Released into open land, they gather in herds, galloping across plains as their ancestors did. Their hooves shape grasslands. Their grazing patterns revive old ecologies. In some places, they vanish under predators. In others, they thrive, running wild, untamed. Even the smallest companions find new paths. Rabbits, already adept at living, between human and wild, spread quickly into fields. Hamsters and guinea pigs do not. Budgerigars, parrots, and canaries escape cages and form flocks where climates suit them, bright wings flashing over forests. Goldfish, released into ponds, vanish or endure, depending on the patience of the water. The story of domesticated strays is uneven. Some species dissolve back into wilderness, others vanish, unable to survive without us. Yet each carries forward a fragment of our presence, an echo of the companionship that once bound us together. Perhaps the most haunting transformation is not physical, but symbolic. The bark of a dog, once a call to human ears, becomes only another sound in the forest. The crow of a rooster marks no human dawn. The neigh of a horse echoes across empty plains without rider. Their voices remain, but their meanings change. Imagine walking, thousands of years ahead, across a meadow that was once farmland. A herd of horses grazes nearby, their coats gleaming in the sun. A pack of dogs watches from a ridge, lean and silent, their eyes sharp. A cat slips through the grass, tail low, pausing at the sight of prey. You would not think of them as domesticated. They are only animals now, carrying no memory of our hands. In our absence, the line between wild and tame dissolves. What was, shaped by us, returns to the world's greater shaping. Dogs become wolves again. Cattle become prey. Cats become shadows. And the earth continues, its wilderness written not only in what was never touched, but also in what we once touched and then abandoned. Beneath the steady spread of plants, beneath the wanderings of animals, whole cities begin to sink. Ruins do not vanish all at once. They settle, tilt, and slowly fold into the earth. Foundations, once anchored deep, weaken as soil shifts and water seeps. Subways and tunnels flood quickly, their air replaced by silt and murky currents. Fish swim where trains once ran, and amphibians creep along rusting rails. In a few centuries, these passageways collapse, sealing themselves in layers of debris. Above, the streets fracture and sag, collapsing into hollows where the ground no longer holds. Buildings follow a slower rhythm. Roofs collapse first, caving under snow, rain, or the weight of vines. Floors fall, beams twist, walls topple. What remains of a tower becomes a jagged mound of rubble, which in time softens under moss and soil. Seeds root in the cracks. Animals burrow through the debris. Rain carries dust into hollows, filling the gaps. 1,000 years pass, and what was once a skyline is only a ridge in the forest floor. Entire neighborhoods slip beneath vegetation. Gardens overgrow fences, their lines dissolving. Trees rise where avenues once stretched, their roots mingling with bricks and broken asphalt. In the quiet centuries, soil builds layer upon layer, burying sidewalks, covering plazas, smoothing all angles. Future wanderers, human or not, would see only forest, marsh, or plain. Beneath their feet, however, foundations rest, silent, entombed in earth. Some materials linger longer than others. Glass shards remain, though dulled and buried. Plastic fragments resist decay, scattering as colored flecks in the soil. Steel corrodes into rust, dispersing as mineral. Concrete blocks, broken and buried, become strange stones, layered into sediment as if natural. One day they may be mistaken for peculiar geology, artifacts of pressure and time. In riverside cities, floods carry ruins downstream. Bricks tumble, stones scatter, steel beams roll along beds, buried beneath centuries of silt. Harbors fill with mud, ports dissolve into deltas. Ships that once crowded docks sink where they rest, becoming reefs, before they are consumed by sediment. Over time, rivers erase the boundary between city and plain, weaving ruins into their meanders. In coastal places, the ocean performs the same quiet work. Storms dismantle seawalls, waves grind concrete into gravel, tides sweep fragments away. Beaches migrate, dunes shift, mangroves spread. What was once cityscape becomes estuary, salt marsh, lagoon. Beneath the water, foundations remain for a time, then vanish beneath sand and coral. Volcanoes, earthquakes, glaciers, these greater forces of geology accelerate the burial. A city built on fault lines crumbles into fissures. Another, resting near a volcano, is layered with ash when the mountain breathes again. A northern town, once vibrant, is scraped by advancing ice, its remains ground into moraine. Yet even without such violence, time buries quietly. A house collapses. Soil drifts. Leaves fall each autumn, layering into humus. In 10 centuries, a meter of soil forms. In 10 millennia, many meters. Cities vanish beneath the slow patience of trees, water, and decay. One can imagine, far into the future, an archaeologist of another kind. Not human, perhaps, but curious, digging into a hillside and finding a layer of strange shapes. Fragments of pottery, beads of glass, rusted outlines of machines. A pattern of right angles buried deep beneath the roots. Would they know what it meant? Would they wonder at the lives that once filled those vanished rooms? Or would the traces be too scattered, too eroded, too strange to decipher? The earth itself does not mark the difference between natural stone and fallen wall. To soil, to root, to river, all is matter, waiting to be reshaped. Imagine standing in a forest, thousands of years from now. The ground beneath your feet feels solid. But a stone you kick aside is smooth concrete. A ridge nearby is not bedrock, but the bones of a buried tower. The forest does not know. The animals do not know. Only the earth remembers, and it remembers in silence. The ruins sink slowly, steadily into the soil. They do not resist. They do not mourn. They only yield, becoming part of the ground that holds them. And so, whole cities vanish, not with thunder, but with patience, folding gently back into the earth that bore them. Beneath the spreading forests and the sinking ruins, fragments of plastic endure. Unlike wood or stone or steel, they resist the cycles of rot and rust. They do not dissolve quickly into soil. Instead, they linger, scattered like bright scars, quiet reminders of a material that was born of us and yet does not belong to the pace of earth. At first, they remain almost unchanged. A bottle rests in the grass beside a crumbling wall. A bag clings to a branch until wind or rain carries it to the ground. Toys, utensils, containers. The shapes are familiar, though already dulled by sun and weather. Colors fade, surfaces crack, but still they remain, stubborn outlines of a vanished culture. A century passes. The bottle has broken into fragments. The bag has shredded into threads. The toy is brittle, its edges crumbling into flakes. Sunlight, waves, and friction grind plastic smaller and smaller until it becomes invisible to the eye. Yet it persists, embedded in soil, carried in rivers, drifting in oceans. Microplastics, a new sediment, one that does not follow the rules of stone. In the ocean, fragments circulate in gyres, endless spirals of current. Fish swallow them. Birds carry them. Whales drift through them. Over centuries, the fragments sink, falling like snow into the deep. There they settle into layers of silt, mingling with shells and volcanic dust, writing themselves into geology. 10,000 years from now, a core sample may reveal a thin band of artificial polymer, a horizon line in Earth's memory that whispers, "Humans were here." Some plastics resist even this slow grinding. Buried in landfills, shielded from light. And air, they endure in near-original form. Whole bags, bottles, packaging layers, sealed in the darkness, waiting. A future dig might uncover them as strange relics, shapes that no natural process would have made. Would another intelligence mistake them for fossils of some vanished creature, or understand them as artifacts of a species that shaped its world? From oil, animals, too, leave their marks through interaction. Birds weave plastic fibers into nests. Over centuries, those nests collapse, but the fibers remain, threaded into soil. Sea turtles once tangled in nets leave skeletons where fragments linger long after flesh is gone. Even as plastic is forgotten, it is carried forward in patterns of life and death. And yet, even plastic is not eternal. Sunlight, salt, frost, and pressure wear it down. Over tens of thousands of years, most fragments disintegrate, reduced to molecules that bind with other compounds that merge invisibly with sediments. Some may persist longer, buried deep, sealed in rock. But even this legacy is not forever. Time absorbs all, though in spans longer than our imagining. What does it mean that one of our longest echoes is not stone monument or steel tower, but plastic? A material so light, so trivial, designed for use and discard, outlasting us in the memory of the planet. Perhaps it is not permanence we leave, but irony. The flimsiest of our creations endure the longest. Imagine kneeling in a meadow, 10,000 years from now, brushing aside soil to find a small, translucent shard. It looks like glass, but it bends before breaking. Around it, roots weave, indifferent. The shard is neither alive nor wholly dead. It is only fragment, awaiting its eventual return to chemistry. The slow rot of plastic is not a story of ruin or disaster. It is simply another story of transformation. The earth does not care for meaning. It only receives, breaks down, incorporates. The fragments of plastic join the endless cycle of dust, sediment, stone. They pass from human artifact into planetary memory, from present into deep time, and so, scattered across forests, deserts, rivers, and seas, Plastic lingers as the faintest echo of us, not proud, not monumental, but persistent. A whisper of a species that once lived, carried forward in fragments until the fragments, too, dissolve into silence. Across coastlines, in harbors and rivers, on mountaintops and in deserts, the skeletons of machines stand abandoned. Ships, planes, trains, and engines of every kind, once symbols of speed and mastery, now rest motionless, their silence deepening with each passing season. In ports, ships are the first to change. Without crews, their bilge pumps stop. Their hulls rust, their ropes fray and part. Some sink at their moorings, slipping beneath the surface with hardly a sound, leaving only masts or superstructures jutting above the water like bones. Others remain afloat for years, slowly filling, their paint blistering, their decks collapsing. Barnacles take hold, mussels cluster, algae mats spread across their surfaces. Fish shelter in the shadows. Over decades, reefs form around the wreckage, new ecosystems woven from the ruins of steel. Planes, resting on runways or in hangars, endure less gracefully. Their light frames corrode quickly, their skins pitted by weather, their tires rotting into cracks. Winds tear away panels, storms scatter wings across fields. In deserts, where air is dry, fuselages linger longer, their outlines stark against the sand. For centuries they stand as husks, strange fossils of aluminum, until the slow abrasion of wind erases them grain by grain. Trains sit in silence along overgrown tracks. Their steel wheels seize with rust, their carriages sag, their windows shatter. Inside, moss spreads across seats, ivy curls through doors, nests gather in corners. In mountain tunnels, engines rest in darkness, their frames slowly dripping with mineral until they are coated in stone and stalactite. What once moved across continents is absorbed into caverns and valleys, hidden from sky and sun. Cars, scattered in cities and highways, crumble faster still. Glass breaks, paint fades, tires rot. Within decades, forests swallow them, their outlines softened beneath moss and soil. Centuries later, they are only faint mounds of rust, indistinguishable from natural outcrops. In the long patience of geology, they dissolve entirely, their metals reincorporated into stone. The rusting skeletons of machines are not only relics of steel. Satellites orbit above, drifting in silence. Their solar panels fracture under micrometeorite strikes. Their batteries fail. Their signals cease. For centuries they circle, dark and inert, until gravity pulls them down. Some burn as brief meteors, streaking the sky like shooting stars. Others fall to ocean or forest, fragments embedding in earth, indistinguishable from meteorites until some future observer wonders at their alloys. Even underground, machines lie waiting. Mines hold drills and trucks, their gears frozen. Tunnels house forgotten conveyors, their belts brittle, their motors clogged with dust. These hidden skeletons may last longer, shielded from weather, but they too corrode, collapsing into rubble, fusing with the rock around them. What is a machine when stripped of purpose? Without motion, without fuel, it is only shape, an arrangement of metals, composites, wires. Once they carried stories of ambition and progress, now they are only materials in transition. A ship becomes reef. A plane becomes dune. A car becomes mound. A satellite becomes starfall. Perhaps, in imagining this, one feels a strange tenderness. For though they are only machines, their stillness holds memory. A rusting bicycle leaning in the grass. A silent tractor resting in a field. A row of buses, windows broken, roots threading through their frames. Each is a trace of movement, of journeys once taken, of lives once carried. But the earth does not mourn their silence. It accepts them, reuses them, dissolves them into new forms. The skeletons of machines, once built to resist nature, become scaffolding for it. Coral colonizes steel hulls. Birds nest in plane fuselages. Foxes den in cars overtaken by soil. The distinction between machine and habitat fades. Imagine standing by the shore, centuries from now, diving into waters where a fleet once rusted. Beneath the surface you find a city of coral, fish, and sponges. The hulls are still there, but softened, reshaped, no longer ship but reef. The machine has returned to the cycle of life. Rusting skeletons scatter across the earth and sky, but none remain untouched. They linger, then dissolve, each one writing its slow story of return. And in that return the earth continues, untroubled, unhurried, patient as ever. The skies grow still. Without human engines to cut their paths across the air, a deep quiet settles above the land and sea. No contrails trace white scars through blue. No jet roars at dawn. No helicopter thrums at dusk. The atmosphere is once, again shaped only by wind, by wing, by weather. Birds feel this change first. For generations they had adjusted their flight to our noise, their paths bent by lights, their calls sharpened to rise above the hum of traffic. Now the air is open. At night, the stars return to full brightness, guides unbroken by the glare of cities. Migratory flocks follow constellations, their routes more direct, their journeys less confused. Along coasts, seabirds travel in greater numbers, their cries falling unmasked into the waves. No longer pulled into illuminated towers or dazzled by glass-reflecting sky, fewer collide with buildings. The silence of skies becomes safety. Owls swoop lower, their wings brushing the grass, their prey unaware. Swans glide across lakes, unbothered by noise from overhead. Raptors climb spirals of warm air without interruption, their circles widening across valleys. The absence of flight changes more than the air. It changes the land itself. Airports grow over with weeds and forests, but their wide, empty clearings become grasslands, resting points for flocks. Runways turn into migration corridors, wildflower meadows attracting pollinators by the millions. The structures meant to guide planes, control towers, radar dishes, rust quietly, but birds nest within them. Every hollow becomes shelter. Insects, too, shift their patterns. Moths once lured into street lamps now rise toward the moon instead. Their abundance feeds bats, whose flights multiply, weaving intricate dances at dusk. Butterflies reclaim fields once trimmed around runways, their colors flashing in sunlight without the shadow of jets above. The skies at sea feel this change more deeply. Without shipping lanes and their lights, vast stretches of ocean night are dark again. Shearwaters, petrels, and other seabirds follow moon and stars without confusion. Turtles, hatching on beaches, crawl toward the glow of horizon over water rather than the false blaze of human lamps. Even whales, whose songs once competed with the rumble of propellers and sonar, find greater quiet. Their voices stretch farther, carrying songs across entire basins, resonating through darkness unbroken by our machines. The silence is not empty. It is filled with new rhythms. Thunderstorms roll across plains with only their own thunder. Rain falls on leaves without being, drowned by engines. The wind itself seems louder, whispering through grasses, roaring across cliffs, sighing in forests. The call of cranes echoes across valleys once filled with sirens. The honk of geese carries cleanly across lakes. Do skies remember our presence? The contrails that once spanned their breadth vanish within hours. The carbon that warmed them lingers for centuries, altering climate slowly, subtly. But the sky itself, the air, the stars, the silence, does not hold memory. It only returns to what it was. Imagine standing in a field, 10,000 years from now. Above you, the sky is unbroken, endless. A V of geese crosses, each wing beat steady. A hawk hovers, watching the grass. At night, stars pour across the dome of the heavens. Meteors streak silently. The Milky Way glows so brightly it casts faint shadows. The air is alive with wings, but no engines intrude. The silence of skies is not emptiness, it is fullness, of flight, of light, of natural song. Freed of our engines, the air breathes again, carrying the movements of life as it once did, as it always will. High above the darkened earth, the last human signals drift. Satellites continue their circuits, tracing invisible threads around the planet. For a time, they persist as they were built to do. Beacons, relays, eyes and ears suspended in orbit. But without the ground to speak to, their transmissions travel outward into silence, unanswered. Some die quickly. Batteries drain, solar panels crack under micrometeoroid strikes, circuitry fails in the vacuum's harshness. Others last longer, circling faithfully for decades, sending pulses into a world that no longer listens. Weather satellites continue to scan storms that no one tracks. Communication satellites send data across empty bands. Space telescopes keep watching stars, recording light onto memory they will never offload. They become ghosts, working without witness. Low Earth orbit, once crowded, begins to clear. Satellites here circle fast, but they also drag against the faintest whisper of atmosphere. Without adjustments, their paths decay. One by one, they fall. Re-entry fire consumes most, streaking across the sky as brief meteors, fading into ash. That scatters into air and ocean. For centuries, the skies above will occasionally glow with such fire, a last whisper of technology dissolving into elements. Higher orbits tell a different story. At geostationary distances, satellites move slowly, locked above the equator. Here, the air is too thin to pull them down quickly. For thousands of years, they may linger, dark husks circling in silence, turning with the Earth, visible only as faint pinpricks to careful eyes below. Beyond them, probes sent outward continue their journeys. Voyagers, pioneers, new horizons. They slip into interstellar dark. No commands come, but their momentum carries them forward, each one a drifting seed of our presence. Their signals weaken, fading to nothing, but the machines endure as silent artifacts. They travel for millions of years, tiny messengers of a vanished species, carried by inertia into the deep. The Earth itself holds fragments of our ghost signals. Old radio waves once used for communication scatter into space at the speed of light. Some have already passed beyond the nearest stars. They weaken as they spread, becoming indistinguishable from cosmic background, but for a time, they carry outward the voices of a species that once spoke across oceans. A faint broadcast of music, a news report, a greeting, traveling farther each year, fading but never entirely gone. Will anyone hear? The question lingers, unanswered. To detect such whispers requires great patience, great sensitivity. Perhaps no ear will ever find them. Perhaps one day, far from now, another mind pauses, tilts its instruments, and hears a ghost of laughter or song, faint but distinct. Perhaps it wonders at the source, at the vanished beings who spoke once and are silent now. On Earth, the satellites decay, the dishes rust, the transmitters fall. Antennas collapse under vines, control rooms crumble. But above, for centuries and millennia, the ghost signals drift, some across the night sky, others across the void between stars. Imagine lying in a meadow, thousands of years into the future. The sky above is dark, rich with stars. You do not know that far overhead, invisible specks circle still, fragments of machines built by hands long gone. You see only meteors flashing, some natural, some the remains of satellites burning. And you hear only silence, the silence of a sky free of voices. Yet in that silence the ghost of signals continues outward. They do not vanish. They stretch, they fade, they merge with the cosmic hum. And so, long after we are gone, the earth itself carries our voice outward, a whisper across the universe, unclaimed, unanswered, but unending. The planet breathes in cycles deeper than memory, cycles of ice and fire, of warmth and chill, of quiet drift and sudden upheaval. Without us, those rhythms continue, as they always have, indifferent to absence. Glaciers thicken where cold gathers. In high mountains, snow falls year by year, compressing into ice. In the deep silence of polar night, ice sheets spread, grinding stone beneath them. Valleys are carved, rivers rerouted, mountains polished. Centuries pass, and forests retreat, before the advancing white. In other epochs, the ice retreats again, rivers roar with meltwater, new lakes gleam in basins freshly carved. Whether we remain or not, the planet has always known this breathing. Glacial advance and glacial retreat, slow heartbeats of climate. Volcanoes speak in another rhythm. Beneath the crust, heat builds, magma stirs, pressure rises. Without humans, to watch, the eruptions still come. Ash fills skies, rivers of fire spread across plains. A city long since empty may be buried in an instant, sealed under pumice and lava. In the silence of centuries, plants return, rooting in volcanic soil rich with minerals. Life thrives in the very place where fire once ended it. Earthquakes, too, remind the ground of its restlessness. Plates shift, faults slip. Mountains rise grain by grain, then suddenly by meters. In minutes, the landscape is remade. Rivers change course, valleys collapse, ridges split. The earth shrugs, unconcerned with what is lost. In these cycles, monuments and machines vanish quickly. Ice scrapes steel into dust. Fire melts stone to glass. Quakes topple towers into rubble that rivers carry away. What felt permanent to us dissolves in the face of forces that measure time not in centuries, but in millions of years. And yet these upheavals are not endings. They are transformations. The ash that falls from an eruption becomes fertile ground for forests. The rubble left by quakes becomes habitat for lichens, moss, and nesting birds. Glacial melt feeds rivers that nourish meadows. Ice and fire, destruction, and renewal flow together in an endless cycle of change. The question lingers. What, if anything, survives these cycles? Perhaps not our monuments, not our machines, but traces remain. Layers in stone, fragments of alloy, patterns of carbon in the atmosphere. Geology does not erase, it records even as it remakes. Imagine standing by a valley thousands of years from now. Before you rises a glacier, brilliant, silent, immense. Behind you, forests stretch across hills born from volcanic ash. Beneath your feet, the ground trembles with the shifting of plates. The earth breathes. In, out, ice, fire. In that breath, humanity is only a brief note, already fading into the vastness of the song. The breath of ice and fire continues. It does not notice our absence. It does not pause. It shapes the world as it always has, with patience, with violence, with renewal. And in that shaping, time itself becomes visible. Vast, unhurried, unending. The continents never sleep. Even as forests spread and rivers wander, the crust itself drifts, slow as thought, steady as breath. Beneath oceans, magma wells and hardens, pushing plates apart. At their edges, they collide, fold, grind, and sink. The face of the earth is never still, though to human eyes it once seemed immovable. 10,000 years without us, the drift continues, a motion almost too slow to measure but certain, unstoppable. A coastline is not fixed. It is only a momentary line between land and sea. With every tide, with every quake, with every rise of ocean, it redraws itself. In our absence, rivers, no longer contained by levees, push sediment into deltas. Marshlands expand, then vanish, replaced by new inlets, new bays. Storms carve away cliffs, collapsing them into surf. A beach disappears, another forms a mile away. To walk the edge of the sea in one age is not the same as in another. Mountains, too, move. They rise by millimeters each year where plates collide, then wear down by wind and rain. Himalayas climb higher as rivers cut deeper into their flanks. The Andes still stretch skyward, even as glaciers grind them grain by grain. In volcanic arcs, islands emerge, then sink. Entire archipelagos are born and vanish within spans of time the Earth measures as moments, though to us they would seem eternal. If another intelligence were to map the Earth 10,000 years after us, its shorelines would not match the ones we left. Florida may be submerged. The Mediterranean may shift as silt fills its basins. Rivers that once fed cities may braid and scatter, creating marshes where streets once ran. Entire islands may vanish beneath waves, while new lands rise, steaming from the sea. The memory of our cities along coasts will be erased not only by water, but by this slow rearranging. Concrete collapses into tide pools, steel rusts into sand, glass shatters into grains indistinguishable from quartz. Beneath it all, the plates continue their movement, remapping continents without concern for what they carry. And yet, even this drift is only part of a deeper rhythm. Continents have gathered and broken apart many times. Pangaea once was, then shattered. Gondwana, Laurasia, names for patterns of stone that came together, then drifted. One day, millions of years from now, the continents will draw together, again, forming a new supercontinent, a new whole. By then, any trace of us will be long gone, folded into mountain belts or buried in seabeds. The drift of continents raises questions that cannot be answered. Does the Earth know it is remaking itself? Is there purpose in the gathering and scattering of land? Or is it only motion, blind and endless, a slow dance of stone across molten depths? Imagine standing on a cliff, thousands of years in the future, watching waves strike below. You feel the ground beneath your feet, solid and ancient. Yet it is, moving, not enough to sense, but enough to matter. With each heartbeat of geologic time, the cliff shifts, the sea adjusts, the earth redraws itself. The drift of continents continues, unhurried, unnoticed by the life upon it. But it is this drift that has always shaped life's course, by raising mountains, by lowering seas, by opening paths, by closing corridors. Humanity was only one chapter within that shifting map. Without us, the motion goes on, vast and patient, writing a story too large for any one species to read. Stone holds memory in ways that are subtle, patient, enduring. Long after metal rusts, long after wood rots, long after fabric turns to dust, carvings remain. Not forever. Nothing is forever, but for longer than most of what we leave behind. 10,000 years without us, the memory in stone is faint, but not entirely gone. Petroglyphs carved into desert cliffs endure the longest. In places where rain is scarce and air is dry, lines pecked into rock survive for tens of thousands of years. Already, images made by hands long vanished still watch from canyon walls. Spirals, animals, human forms. If our own carvings linger, they may remain as strange echoes, their meaning unknown but their presence undeniable. A circle scratched in granite may outlast a city, though the language it once spoke dissolves into silence. Temples, too, persist longer than steel towers. Stone blocks, massive and interlocked, resist collapse even as vegetation advances. Roofs may fall, carvings may blur, but foundations hold. In jungles, ruins already lie hidden beneath trees, their outlines softened but still recognizable. Without people, such temples vanish under green for centuries, only to be revealed again when roots collapse and soil shifts. The forest swallows and reveals in an endless cycle. In mountains, carvings made directly into cliffs endure still longer. The faces of deities, kings, and animals remain etched in rock while cities at their feet dissolve. Rain wears them slowly, grain by grain. 1,000 years smooths the cheek, 10,000 softens the brow. Eventually, the features blend into cliff, yet for a time they linger, half stone, half memory. Tombstones crumble faster, carved from softer stone. Within centuries, inscriptions fade, names blur into illegibility. Yet, in some arid deserts, even names may endure. Letters still legible when languages that once read them are gone. In wetter places, moss and frost erase them quickly, returning each marker to anonymity. What, then, remains of our story? In stone, only fragments. A column rising alone from forest floor. A carving in sandstone cliff. A wall, half toppled, its blocks scattered, its mortar gone. Each is incomplete, stripped of meaning, but still a whisper. Humans were here. And yet the memory in stone is not permanent. Even granite yields to frost, wind, water. Even the hardest carving is blurred eventually into surface, into curve, into dust. Time does not erase deliberately. It erases through persistence, through patience, through the endless movement of elements. Perhaps, if another intelligence one day walks this earth, they will find a carved fragment. A line etched into rock, a symbol cut into wall. Would they know it was made, or think it natural? Would they guess at the hand that shaped it, or pass it by as accident of erosion? The answer cannot be known. The stone itself does not speak. Imagine, standing in a desert valley 10,000 years from now. The cliffs rise around you, weathered and golden. On one face, faint lines remain, a spiral, a curve, a mark once clear. You do not know what it meant. You only know it was deliberate, that it was placed here by intention. The meaning has vanished, but the gesture remains, like an echo of a voice you cannot quite hear. The memory in stone lingers longer than most, but not forever. It endures, then fades, like all things. What it tells is not our story in full, but only hints, fragments, shadows. The earth holds them briefly, then carries them away. Beneath waves, the ocean becomes an archive. Everything we leave upon its shores or drop into its depths is carried, sorted, and preserved in ways both subtle and immense. Sediment drifts downward with patience, grain by grain, layering the seabed like pages in a book. In those pages, fragments of us may linger far, longer than on land. Along coastlines, buildings collapse into tides. Their rubble is tumbled by waves, broken into pebbles, scattered into sand. But some fragments sink into sheltered bays, buried in silt within decades. Covered quickly, they are spared from erosion, locked in place beneath mud. A shard of glass, a rusting nail, a ceramic bowl. Each becomes fossil of a kind, preserved not as living thing, but as artifact entombed. Ships that once crossed oceans rest now as reefs. As centuries pass, their steel dissolves, their wood vanishes, but their shapes leave impressions in seabed layers. Corals grow, die, and layer upon them. Fish bones scatter nearby, mixing with fragments of hull. when the corals collapse, when the fish are gone, sediment settles over the remains. In the strata of future stone, a faint outline may linger, an unnatural pattern, a symmetry too deliberate to be chance. Plastics, light and stubborn, drift across currents before sinking. Some float for centuries, others are chewed into fragments, swallowed, excreted, cycled again. Eventually they sink, drawn down by weight of organic matter, carried to deep plains where light never reaches. There they rest, mixed with shells and dust. Thousands of years later, they may be found as thin veins of polymer threaded through rock, a chemical fingerprint of our time. Even carbon speaks of us. The fuel we burned, the forests we cut, the gases we released, all left their trace in ocean chemistry. Coral skeletons layered through centuries, record shifts in acidity. Shells thinned by altered seas leave their testimony in silence. Future eyes, reading these archives, might see the pulse of human presence as a sudden, sharp line, distinct from all before and after. Bones, too, reach the seabed. Those of whales, fish, seals, and rarely humans, sink to rest. In most cases they dissolve, scattered by scavengers, but in cold, low-oxygen waters, skeletons last longer. Buried quickly by silt, they may fossilize. A rib, a tooth, a fragment of skull may remain, pressed into stone. If uncovered 10,000 years hence, it would not reveal a life, only a presence, a trace of biology among countless others. The ocean's archive is vast, but it is not permanent. Subduction zones swallow seabeds, drawing sediments down into the mantle. In millions of years, today's ocean floor will melt, recycle, and rise, again as mountain or volcanic plain. Yet before that return, for tens or hundreds of millennia, the ocean holds its records quietly, layer upon layer, patient and impartial. On land, ruins may crumble into invisibility, but beneath seas, traces remain longer, sealed from wind and storm. A broken harbor wall, silted over, a forest of pilings, buried in mud, a scattering of pottery, covered by centuries of sand. Each fragment lies waiting, silent, hidden, preserved, by water's stillness. Imagine descending far in the future to the floor of a shallow sea. Around you are corals, fish, drifting light. Beneath your feet, the seabed seems smooth. But dig, and you find a shard, bright, artificial, unmistakable. You do not know its purpose, but you know it does not belong to tide or current. It is memory, embedded in ocean, waiting quietly for discovery. The ocean keeps our traces not to honor us, but because that is its way, to gather, to bury, to preserve. It is an archive without intention, a library without librarian. And in that archive, humanity becomes another thin layer, one among billions, written not in words, but in sediments, shells, and shards. Far beyond the oceans, beyond forests and mountains, signals drift upward into the silence of space. They are faint, fragile, yet persistent. Radio waves, television broadcasts, radar pulses, fragments of music, fragments of voices. For over a century before our vanishing, humanity filled the atmosphere with these whispers, sending them outward, without intention. 10,000 years without us, they are still traveling, still expanding, a bubble of soundless echoes swelling into the dark. Within light years, they are already thin, stretched across vast distances. A single broadcast, once strong enough to circle the Earth, becomes fainter than starlight, weaker than the background hum of the universe itself. By the time it passes even the nearest stars, it is indistinguishable from noise. Yet it is there, woven invisibly into the cosmos, part of the endless fabric of radiation that flows everywhere. Closer to home, some signals linger longer, Probes we launched into deep space still carry their silent messages. Gold records etched with music, images, greetings, drift aboard the Voyagers. They are mute now, their transmitters weak, but the records remain. Metal discs circling a distant star in unimaginable centuries. Whether they are ever found, or whether they corrode slowly in cosmic dust, they carry a trace of our desire to be remembered. Around Earth itself, satellites once relayed streams of data. Even after their systems fail, some drift for thousands of years, dark husks circling in graveyard orbits. They are signals made solid, artifacts rather than transmissions. But they tell the same story. Once, a species sought connection beyond its own horizon. What happens to these whispers when no one listens? Do they still matter, spreading forever, into silence? Or do they dissolve into nothing once they pass beyond perception? The universe does not answer. It simply receives, holds, and scatters. Perhaps one day, far into the future, another intelligence turns its instruments toward the sky and notices something odd. A pulse, a pattern, a faint rhythm buried in the noise. Perhaps they decode a fragment, a word, a note of music, a laugh carried across millennia. Or perhaps the signals fade so completely that they never meet another ear. Both are possibilities. Neither changes the fact that the signals have already gone, already left Earth, already become part of the greater chorus of radiation that hums across the cosmos. From our perspective, the idea itself is haunting. We vanish, but our voices continue outward, not as monuments or fossils, but as patterns of energy, written on the air, cast into space. No temple endures so long. No tower carries so far. Imagine lying in a field beneath a night sky. Above, stars gleam in silence. Yet across those stars, invisible, immeasurable, passes a thin wash of signals. Sitcom laughter from a century ago, a scientist's announcement of discovery, a child's voice carried on early radio, fragments of war and peace, of art and conversation. None of it audible now, yet all of it real, a ghost imprint carried outward at the speed of light. Signals in the stars remind us that presence is not only physical, it is also vibration, pattern, motion. Even in silence, something of us continues, at least for a time, across the vast and indifferent universe. The Earth has always kept fossils, pressed into stone like memories too heavy to vanish, shells etched in limestone, fern fronds imprinted in shale, bones turned to mineral beneath river mud. 10,000 years without us, the question lingers. Do our bones, scattered and fragile, join this archive? Do we, too, become fossils? Most bones dissolve before they are ever preserved. Exposed to weather, they soften, crumble, are carried away by water or consumed by soil. In cities left empty, human remains may rest in houses, in hospitals, in streets. Within years, they collapse into dust, leaving little trace. In cemeteries, coffins rot, markers fall, names fade. Only in rare conditions, deep burial, quick sediment, dry cave, frozen tundra, do bones endure long enough to fossilize. Yet chance favors persistence in some places. In deserts, skeletons dry and remain intact for centuries, slowly buried under drifting dunes. In peat bogs, acidic waters preserve flesh itself, though time eventually erases even these. In permafrost, whole bodies may rest for millennia, locked in ice until warming releases them. In river valleys and floodplains, mud may seal remains, swiftly protecting them until mineral replacement begins. If any of us do become fossils, they will be rare, scattered, fragmentary. A tooth here, a femur there, pressed into stone and hidden for ages. A future intelligence might uncover one, hold it, and wonder at its shape. Would they know it was human or mistake it for some other creature? Would they see in its form the trace of a being that walked upright, that once spoke and dreamed? Or would it be only bone, only stone, anonymous among countless others? Beyond bones, other traces may fossilize. Impressions of buildings, pressed into sediments as foundations sink. Footprints preserved in mudflats, hardened by sun, then buried. Objects of stone, glass, or ceramic sealed in rock, mistaken one day for natural inclusions until their patterns reveal intention. The earth does not separate biology from artifact. Both may rest side by side in its layers, and yet fossils are not forever. Mountain building folds them. Heat and pressure erase them. Subduction swallows them into mantle. For millions of years, they may remain, but in the scale of Earth's history, even fossils are temporary. The question, then, is not whether humans leave fossils, but what those fossils mean. To the Earth, they are simply matter: calcium carbonate, silica, iron. To another intelligence, they might suggest story, lineage, loss. But story requires memory, and memory requires a reader. Without one, fossils are only stone. Imagine standing in a canyon, far in the future. Layers of rock rise above you, each stratum a page of history. In one layer, you see a shell. In another, a fern. In another, the faint outline of a bone. Long, curved, unfamiliar. You cannot know the being it belonged to. You only know it lived, that it walked here once, that time pressed it into permanence before carrying it forward. The question of fossils lingers like a whisper. Do we remain, written in stone? Or do we vanish, our bones dissolving before memory? Forms? The earth offers no answer. It only keeps what chance allows and buries the rest in silence. If another intelligence one day walks here, what do they find of us? 10,000 years without humanity. The earth is wild again, forests and oceans alive in their own rhythms. Yet beneath roots, beneath sediments, fragments of our presence linger. To curious eyes they may be puzzles, artifacts, questions pressed into the ground. Imagine a being wandering across a meadow where a city once stood. The grass bends in wind, birds rise in flocks, insects hum. Nothing suggests what lies beneath, but if they dig, they might uncover strange stones, concrete blocks with pebbles bound unnaturally, rebar threads rusted through. They might find ceramics, colored shards harder than the soil around them. They might find plastic, brittle and translucent, shaped into forms without obvious function. Each fragment is a clue, though not a full story. Would such a being know these were made? Or would they seem like oddities of geology, curious but natural? A straight edge, a smooth curve, a symmetry not common in stone. Perhaps they would recognize design, though not purpose. Perhaps they would see pattern but not meaning. Other traces lie deeper. In layers of sediment, chemical signatures remain. Carbon spikes from our fuels, isotopes from our reactors, molecules synthesized nowhere else. To a future intelligence, these may speak more clearly than broken artifacts. The rocks themselves carry record of a brief, sharp alteration in atmosphere and ocean, a geologic fingerprint, the Anthropocene, written not in monuments but in chemistry. Would they wonder at it? Would they ask what force altered the planet so swiftly? Would they imagine an intelligence or only a natural event? To read story in stone requires imagination, and imagination is never guaranteed. Yet perhaps some ruins remain visible. A mountain face with faint carvings. A half-buried pyramid softened but still geometric. A temple reclaimed by jungle yet still standing, its columns wrapped in roots. These shapes may endure long enough to spark questions. Who made them? Why? Where are they now? Questions with no answers, only echoes. The possibility itself feels haunting, that another species, another intelligence, may kneel in the soil where we once walked, holding an artifact without knowing its maker, a shard of pottery, a corroded coin, a fossilized bone. They might study it, turn it in their hands, wonder at the story behind it. They might never know. And what if the intelligence is not of Earth? Perhaps wanderers from another world land. Here, long after we are gone, they step across meadows, climb mountains, swim seas. They find no people, but they find fragments, ruins beneath forest, signals in stone, isotopes in soil. Would they piece together a civilization, or would the evidence be too faint, too scattered, too strange? Perhaps they would misread. Perhaps they would imagine giants or insects, or some form unlike us entirely. Perhaps they would never imagine humanity as it was, upright, dreaming, fragile, fleeting. Imagine, then, the quiet of that moment. Another being, in another age, uncovering a shard of glass, holding it to the light, seeing it shine, feeling the weight of mystery, of story untold. For us, the shard was ordinary. For them, it is enigma. If another intelligence one day walks, here, what do they find of us? Only fragments, only hints, enough to ask questions, never enough to answer, and perhaps that is how it should be. Our presence becomes not memory, but mystery. An invitation to wonder at what once was, before time carried it all into silence. The silence of forgotten names drapes itself across the earth. Language was one of our great creations, the thread that bound thought to sound, sound to meaning, meaning to memory. Yet language is fragile. Words survive only in voices, in texts, in carvings. Without us they unravel quickly, leaving only silence where once there was endless speech. In the first centuries, libraries collapse. Paper, fragile even in our care, decays in damp and sunlight. Ink fades. Shelves buckle. Books dissolve into mulch for insects and roots. Digital archives fare no better. Servers corrode. Drives fail. Signals die. All that once seemed infinite, in its abundance of words, is gone in a few generations of weather and neglect. Carved inscriptions endure longer, yet even stone is not eternal. Letters blur under rain. Edges soften under wind. In deserts, words last longer, etched deep into dry cliffs. In temples, hidden beneath jungle, glyphs linger for centuries. But time erases all alphabets eventually. 1,000 years smooths an inscription to a faint shadow. 10,000 years makes it indistinguishable from natural fracture. Names go first. They are the most fragile. A name lives only when spoken, only when remembered by another voice. Once unspoken, it vanishes. Millions of names, each once bound, to a life, dissolve into air. Within a few centuries, no voice speaks them. Within a few millennia, even the languages they belong to are gone. Stories linger slightly longer, but even they unravel. Without readers, epics become silence. Without listeners, songs vanish into the air. Without memory, words no longer tether meaning. The silence grows not all at once, but wave by wave, until every word we spoke is gone. What remains then of us? Not the names, not the languages, not the conversations. Only traces of presence without words. Artifacts with no explanation. Fossils with no story. Structures with no names carved into their stone. The meanings we gave them dissolve, leaving only the material, mute and anonymous. Perhaps in this forgetting, there is a kind of peace. Names bind us to identity, to ego, to story. Without them, there is only being, only the fact that something once existed. A building is only stone. A fossil is only bone. A shard is only glass. Without words, they are freed from our narratives and simply are. Imagine standing in a meadow, long after names are gone. The wind moves through grass. Birds sing, but no one names their songs. A tree sways, but no one knows its species. The world is itself, unspoken, unnamed. There is beauty in the silence, the kind that comes when meaning is no longer needed. And yet, one wonders, does something linger beyond language? Does the earth hold memory even without words? Do rivers remember the syllables once spoken along their banks? Do mountains carry echoes of names whispered to them? Or does the forgetting sweep everything clean, returning the world to pure presence, pure sound, pure silence? The silence of forgotten names is not emptiness. It is transformation. It is the shift from meaning to being, from story to existence. Humanity's languages dissolve, but the world continues, unlabeled, unbound, breathing in its own rhythm. The planet breathes again, unhurried, as if stretching after a long tension. With human hands gone, the balance shifts toward wilderness, toward cycles older than memory. What once was constrained finds space. What once was pressed down rises. It is not a sudden change, not a triumphant flourish, but a quiet continuation. The planet carrying on as it always has, now without our interference. Forests spread across plains once plowed. Rivers braid freely, shifting their channels across valleys. Mountains weather and crumble, while new ridges rise far away. Oceans lap inland, filling marshes and bays, while coral reefs build silently in warm shallows. Each movement is part of a larger rhythm, each change folded into the vast patience of Earth's breathing. Do we imagine Earth noticing our absence, as loss, as relief, or perhaps as neither? Perhaps the planet is indifferent, concerned only with its endless cycling of elements. Rain falls, soil forms, rock grinds into sand, lava cools into stone. The world does not mourn, it simply moves, and yet our presence lingers faintly. Not in monuments, not in names, but in traces. Fragments of alloy in soil, shards of ceramic. In riverbeds, polymers buried in strata, chemical signatures in oceans, carbon traces in ice. Subtle reminders that a species once lived here, reshaping landscapes in ways both fleeting and lasting. These reminders are not the planet's memory. They are only evidence, carried forward until erosion or subduction swallows them. Meanwhile, life thrives. Birds multiply, freed from city lights. Whales sing across oceans undisturbed by engines. Insects return to abundance, their wings shimmering over meadows. Predators stalk again across ranges they once lost. Plants spread where fences once stood. The earth is filled not with absence, but with presence. New presences, older presences, presences that were always waiting. Imagine standing within a forest grown where a city once lay. Around you rise trunks centuries old, their crowns weaving, a canopy. Roots coil through the remains of concrete, breaking it into dust. Streams wander where streets once guided rain. The air smells of pine and moss, not exhaust. You would not know this place had ever been city unless you uncovered a shard or ridge hidden beneath the soil. What you see is only forest, alive, breathing, present. The question lingers. Is the earth better without us? Or was our presence simply another brief variation, like a season, like an ice age, like the bloom and fade of countless species before? The answer may not matter. What matters is that the planet breathes again, its rhythms uninterrupted, its cycles whole. A planet that breathes again does not erase us. It simply folds us into its larger story. We become part of the soil, part of the ocean, part of the sky. Our absence does not silence the world. it frees the world to continue its endless song. Time stretches, vast and patient. 10,000 years without us is both an instant and an eternity. In that span, the earth has shifted, healed, reshaped itself. Yet in the deeper scale of geologic history, even 10 millennia is only a breath. Mountains measure their lives in millions of years. Oceans shift their basins over tens of millions. Continents gather and scatter across hundreds of millions. Against such spans, humanity is a flicker, luminous, brief, already fading. The long patience of time is not hurried. It carries every event evenly, without judgment, without pause. A city rises, falls, and is forgotten. A species blooms, spreads, and disappears. A glacier advances, retreats, and melts into sea. The rhythm is steady, unbroken, like waves against shore. What feels final to us is only transition to time. Our presence is one layer among countless others. Dinosaurs left bones, ammonites left shells, ferns left prints, trilobites left shadows pressed into stone. We leave plastics, alloys, isotopes, shards of glass. Each becomes sediment. Each becomes geology. Time does not distinguish between them. It folds them all into rock, into strata, into the patient language of stone. In that language, memory is not narrative but pattern. A sudden spike of carbon, a thin layer of polymer, a scattering of unusual minerals. To time, these are not stories of ambition or failure. They are simply records, marks of change, to be, carried forward until erosion or subduction erases them. The long patience of time also carries life. Species vanish, others appear. Insects, birds, fish, forests. They change with climate, with continent, with chance. Our absence allows some to expand, others to retreat. Yet in the scale of deep time, all species are temporary. Even those that thrive now will one day be gone, replaced by new forms born of mutation and survival. Do we exist in time's memory? Or are we already forgotten, folded into the same anonymity that holds trilobites and ammonites? Perhaps both. To ourselves, we were unique, aware, striving. To time, we are one of many, brief sparks across an endless canvas. Imagine standing on a cliff, tens of thousands of years from now. Beneath you, waves strike stone. Around you, forests sway. Above, stars drift slowly in their ancient arcs. None of them remember us. None of them need to. The world is full, complete, even without our memory. The long patience of time humbles and comforts. It erases, but it also renews. It reminds us that nothing is permanent, but also that nothing is truly lost. Everything becomes part of something larger: soil, ocean, atmosphere, stone. In that endless transformation, our presence is absorbed, not erased, and so the earth waits, not for us, not against us, but with us, folded into its fabric. The long patience of time carries on, unbroken, eternal, unmindful of names, but full of motion. Only the stars remain. Night after night, the dome above continues its quiet work, unbothered by the silence below. The long wash of the Milky Way lays a river of light from horizon to horizon, granular, pale, immense. Planets still wander along the old ecliptic road, bright points slipping from constellation to constellation as they have always done. Meteors thread brief silver needles through the fabric of darkness. The sky keeps its rhythm, patient and exacting, whether eyes are there to read it or not. The moon lifts and sets, growing thin, growing full, a slow pendulum of light and shadow. Tides answer as they always do, pulling coastlines in and out like breath. Eclipses still happen on their quiet schedule. the Earth and Moon and Sun slipping into alignment with a precision as old as gravity. On land, an owl tilts its head to the dimmed glow. At sea, a wave takes the light and breaks it into 1,000 silver shards. The sky offers its cycles freely, neither rewarding nor withholding, only turning. Across millennia, the stars themselves do not hurry, yet their patterns drift. The planet tilts through its long precessional circle, and the north of the world points elsewhere in the vault. The star that steadies the axis now is not the one that steadied it before. Constellations loosen, ever so slightly. Familiar shapes relax into unfamiliar angles. A triangle becomes a scalene. A hunter lengthens his stride. A river of stars bends by a hair's breadth. The change is slow enough to miss in a lifetime, but not in 10,000 years. Night after night, the sky is both the same and not the same, continuity braided with shift. On the ground, old alignments falter. Stones that once greeted solstice sunrise no longer catch it at the exact notch. Temples that once framed a star now frame an emptiness where that star has drifted on. The architecture forgets what it pointed to, not because stone ceases to remember direction, but because the sky itself changes its geometry with patience. Orientation becomes storyless. Meaning returns to rock and shadow. The galaxies beyond do not notice any of this. They wheel in their vast spirals, arms loaded with clusters, lanes dark with dust. Their light arrives as it always has, old, thin, exquisite. Some of it left before forests spread on land. Some of it began when oceans were only vapor. The background hum, that faint, everywhere echo of the universe's earliest moments, still bathes the night, a temperature barely above nothing, a whisper that never ends. To look upward is to look into time, but time itself does not look back. Closer stars carry their own quiet changes. A red giant swells somewhere, unnoticed by Earth for now. A blue star burns through its fuel and settles. Somewhere, eventually, a supernova writes a new sentence across the sky, bright enough to cast shadows at midnight, brief enough to leave only remembrance in rock and rumor if any were there to tell it. Comets still tumble in from the dark, growing, veils and tails, crossing the inner planets, then leaving again to cold. Their periods stretch longer than memory. Their returns mean nothing except return itself. Beneath that sky, the world sleeps. Forest canopies breathe sugar from starlight's cousin, moonlight's echo, their real work done by day but their calm held by night. Rivers turn their faces to the heavens and carry the constellations along as trembling mosaics. Snowfields shine with a dull inward glow. Sand reflects in low murmurs. The eye that is no longer there is not required. The beauty is not performance. There is a thought that lingers, soft as dew. Against this permanence, what does it mean that humanity was ever here? Once, eyes traced the hero shapes, gave names to clusters, folded myth into asterisms. Once, instruments measured the redshift of galaxies, the proper motion of stars, the cold of the background. Once, dishes turned, optics cooled, and data poured like rain. All of that has fallen silent. Yet the starfield is no less articulate. It simply speaks a language without listeners, a grammar of mass and light. In the absence of our brightness, the night recovers subtleties. Airglow becomes more legible, a greenish veil, a delicate respiration in the upper atmosphere. The zodiacal light rises in the pre-dawn like a pale wedge, dust in the plane of planets catching daybreak before day. Arrives. Aurora unwind their curtains along polar ovals, unchallenged by floodlit towns, each ripple a signature of particles spiraling down magnetic field lines from storms the sun still throws. Even darkness has textures, gradations, small tones only, uncovered when noise is gone. The sun remains the local constant, an ordinary star with a quiet heart. It rises, it sets, its 11-year moods ripple the ionosphere and then recline. In 10,000 years it is much as it was, relentless and patient, the great metronome to which weather, growth, and time align. Beyond that span lie epochs. The sun will reserve for other transformations, but they are not here yet. The present sky is enough. On mountain plateaus, frost-clarified nights make the galaxy so bright that ground casts faint star shadow. In deserts, the horizon is a clean edge, the kind that lets the first star be seen as a singular event, not a gradual peppering. Over oceans, the stars wheel like a dome placed upon a mirror, the shipless water repeating them with hardly a tremor. In forests, the canopy parts into small windows. The constellations become a mosaic of glimpses, each framed by leaves. In tundra, the aurora dances. In tropics, the Milky Way leans near enough to feel like breath. If an intelligence arrives anew, day. They inherit this same sky, altered but faithful. Perhaps their instruments surpass ours. Perhaps their senses are their instruments. They may not know the names once given to the shapes or the stories tied to figures traced between stars. They may invent new lines, new narratives, new coordinate grids. The sky will accommodate them as it accommodated us, not because it intends to, but because it is too large not to. The stars remain, and so does the question. Is meaning something imposed or something revealed? Do constellations exist because minds connect dots, or because patterns wait to be found? The night offers no verdict. It offers only points of light spread across an expanding universe, a canvas vast enough for every answer and none. Imagine a winter midnight thousands of years from now. Breath lifts in smoke threads. Snow creaks under weight. The silence is full and gentle. Overhead, the galaxy pours its pale dust. Along the ecliptic, a planet hangs with steady brilliance. Across the north, a slow wheel turns around a star that is not the star you remember. There is no label, no legend, no tale attached. Only light, only distance, only the exquisite fact that it exists, that it goes on. Only the stars remain, not as witnesses, not as keepers of memory, but as themselves. In their company, the earth rests easily. In their light, the forests sleep. In their long, unhurried burning, the universe keeps its counsel, and the night keeps its grace. The earth does not wait for witnesses. Beneath the quiet skin of continents, heat gathers in pockets of magma, flowing, shifting, restless. Humanity's absence does not quiet this deep pulse. It was never ours to command. Long before us, and long after us, the molten breath of the planet continues, shaping and reshaping its surface with patience and with violence. Volcanoes rise and fall in cycles that disregard memory. Some mountains stand silent for centuries, their peaks soft with snow, their slopes thick with pine and moss. Yet deep inside, pressure mounts grain by grain, crystal by crystal, as molten rock forces its way upward. Then, one day, whether after decades or millennia, the pressure breaks, the earth exhales, and fire climbs toward the sky. In the absence of humans, there are no warnings, no seismographs, no evacuation sirens. An eruption unfolds into silence. Ash towers rise into the troposphere, spreading like vast ink stains across the sky. Forests vanish under rivers of fire. Valleys fill with black rock that glows, then cools, then hardens into a new crust. A city, once vibrant, now already softened by vines and collapse, is swallowed whole in an afternoon. Towers melt into pools of glass, metals warp and twist, roads are erased in a single red tide. What once seemed permanent becomes foundation for something new. And yet this is not destruction in the way humans once feared it. It is a return to geology's rhythm. The lava, cooling, forms basalt plains where ferns unfurl within decades. Volcanic ash, at first suffocating, becomes soil of extraordinary richness, drawing forests back faster than before. What fire takes, it also gives: nutrients, minerals, a rebirth written in molten script. Imagine standing 10,000 years hence where once a metropolis lay. The ground beneath is black, rippled, layered with frozen currents of lava. A volcano towers nearby, quiet now, its cone softened by rain and wind. Around its base, forests surge: oak, cedar, birch, woven with moss and fern. Roots pierce the ash, feeding on minerals that fire released. Birds nest in cracks where once was molten stone. The place remembers heat, but it breathes only green. Volcanoes also bury. Entire human histories may vanish beneath layers of pumice, tuff, and basalt. Archaeologists of another age, whether human descendants or another form of intelligence, might one day dig and find a stratum of strange geometry: steel twisted into stone, glass fused with ash, fragments of concrete sealed like insects in amber. Would they recognize these shapes as deliberate, or mistake them for odd minerals born of fire? The planet does not ask. For it, cities and lava are the same, material to be rearranged. Volcanic fields stretch wide, building new landscapes. Islands rise in the ocean, steaming as they cool, quickly colonized by seabirds and lichens. Old mountains collapse into calderas, filling with lakes so deep they hold entire climates within them. In this slow breathing of fire, time takes on a different scale. A century is only an inhalation, 1,000 years a heartbeat. Human memory never stretched comfortably across such spans, but the earth has no difficulty with patience. It exhales heat when it must, reshapes mountains when it must, then waits, again in silence. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: that many of the traces of our species may vanish not to decay or erosion, but to fire. Entire regions could be sealed beneath molten stone, erased utterly from the visible earth. And yet, in that erasure, the story continues. For stone is never still, and what is lost in one form reappears in another. So the volcanoes breathe on. Without us, they speak only to the sky. To the rivers they redirect. To the forests that grow in their ash. They do not remember us, and they do not need to. Their language is older, written in eruptions, calderas, and plains of black glass. It is the language of a planet that never stops shaping itself. The ground keeps everything, though it keeps it in silence. What falls upon the soil, what drifts into rivers, what sinks into ocean mud, all of it is drawn slowly downward, folded layer upon layer until time itself presses memory into stone. Humanity's absence does not stop this work. If anything, it makes the process simpler. There are no landfills tended, no recycling plants humming, no excavations turning the soil. Only gravity, sediment, and pressure continue their endless patience. Fossils, in the deep sense, are less about preservation than about transformation. Shells dissolve, yet their shapes remain, filled in by minerals. Bones soften, replaced by silica or iron, until they are no longer bone but rock, perfect replicas of what once was alive. The same awaits the remnants of humanity, not our bodies. Those will vanish swiftly, taken by bacteria, scavengers, sun, and rain. But the artifacts we leave behind may one day slip into the fossil record, joining ammonites, trilobites, fern leaves, and dinosaur bones in the long gallery of geological memory. What becomes fossil in our wake? Not the grand monuments, for most, will collapse, scatter, and erode long before they are buried. Instead, the fossils of humanity may be small things, ordinary things. A child's marble pressed into clay. A shard of ceramic, its glaze intact after millennia. A fragment of circuit board, its metals leaching into stone, its outlines still visible. Perhaps a bottle cap, a fishing hook, a coin. These modest shapes, insignificant in life, may endure as our longest echoes. Plastics, too, join this strange, future stream. Not as intact bottles or bags, but as fragments, pressed with sand into thin layers of rock that geologists might one day call plastiglomerate. Stone fused with polymer, a hybrid material born only of our era. In 10,000 years, beaches may still reveal these strange pebbles, neither natural nor entirely artificial, each one a fossil of a species that once melted oil into shape. Even stranger is the possibility of fossils within fossils. Consider a bird's nest woven partly of plastic threads. Long after the bird has died and the nest has collapsed, the threads may persist, mineralized alongside twigs and feathers. Or imagine the jawbone of a fish that swallowed a fragment of polymer. Over time, both fish and fragment could fossilize. Together, a mingled testament to life and artifact entwined. Silicon chips, those delicate lattices of etched pathways, might also leave traces. Buried deep, shielded from weather, their patterns may survive long enough to be mineralized. Future beings, prying apart layers of stone, could one day discover thin wafers marked by regular lines, like microscopic fossils of fern leaves or diatoms. Would they recognize them as machines, or only as curious minerals, geometric in ways nature seldom chooses? And then there are the great deposits we have left. Entire landfills filled with layered objects, sealed by soil and vegetation. Over time, these mounds may compress into artificial strata, packed with relics. Centuries will break them down, but the outline of the deposit itself, a hill of unusual composition, rich in metals, glass, and carbonized plastic, may persist, as long as any natural seam of ore or coal. The landfill, forgotten by all, becomes a geological feature. What, then, will be read in these fossil streams? 10,000 years from now, if someone were to slice through a cliffside, what would they find? Perhaps a thin horizon of microplastics, glimmering under magnification. Perhaps fragments of concrete hardened into conglomerate, with rebar preserved like the ribs of some unknown animal. Perhaps shells with faint traces of radioactive isotopes, evidence of the nuclear era. Perhaps a stratum rich in chicken bones, billions upon billions once bred for food, now fossilized into a marker of our presence. Geology has no hierarchy of importance. It does not privilege marble statues over bottle caps, golden crowns over rusted nails. It preserves what it happens to preserve. The grandest works may vanish entirely, while the most trivial persist. Our legacy may not be pyramids or cathedrals, but a seam of chicken bones and plastic, a line in the rock that whispers, "Here, for a brief moment, something different stirred." Imagine a far future creature, intelligent in its own way, cutting into a hillside. It pauses at a layer dense with unfamiliar textures, fragments of glass, ceramic, alloy. It runs its appendages across their surfaces, puzzled by their shapes. Does it wonder at the beings who made them? Does it imagine lives, cities, voices? Or does it simply catalog the layer as anomaly, a brief variation in the slow song of stone? Fossils are never really about the past. They are about continuity. They carry forward shapes, not stories, echoes, not voices. What was once alive becomes rock, and rock becomes part of the planet's ongoing architecture. The fossil stream does not ask who we were. It only folds us into its flow. And so, humanity's memory in stone will be modest, scattered, strange. Not statues, not libraries, but fragments, pressed into sediment and mineralized by patience. A bottle cap, a chip of silicon, a bone. Each one quiet, each one enduring. Together they form the faintest line in the immense book of geology. A line that says only this: for a moment we were here. The world has always had its own music. Long before human ears tuned it into scales and harmonies, there were notes written in wind, rhythms carried in waves, and chords struck by thunder. With humanity gone, instruments of stone, steel, and wood remain scattered across the earth, not in concert halls or orchestras anymore, but in forests, deserts, and ruins. They are no longer played by hands, yet the world does not fall silent. Instead, it begins to compose on them again, slowly, without audience, without applause. A skyscraper, its glass broken and ribs exposed, becomes a kind of harp. Wind threads, through empty beams, whistling tones across rusted steel. On stormy days, the whole structure hums, a low resonance that travels down into the ground. Once it was office, shelter, ambition. Now it is organ pipe, playing to the air itself. Collapsed bridges take another role. Their fractured spans groan when tides rise, the water striking beams like mallets. Waves slap rhythms against pylons, steady as drums. In time, these fragments sink, but while they stand, they sound. An accidental percussion section echoing along forgotten rivers. Smaller places carry subtler scores. A half-shuttered window rattles each night in a ruined apartment. A delicate cymbal clashing with every gust. Hollow bottles in gutters fill with rain, and when the wind blows across their necks, they sing in tones soft and eerie. Corridors of concrete, stripped bare, amplify the calls of owls and the scuttle of rodents until they resemble compositions, improvised and fleeting. Insects join the orchestra. Crickets pulse their steady rhythms in the cracks of an old stadium. Cicadas rise in waves, filling the air with shimmering choruses that echo across the collapsed seats. Beetles drum against hollow wood, their clicks magnified in empty lobbies where once people cheered and clapped. The spaces we built for our voices become new concert halls, now tuned to the songs of smaller lives. Even stone participates. Pebbles fall in abandoned tunnels, striking notes against metal rails before sinking into silence. Stalactites drip into flooded subway stations, each drop striking water with a sound that is at once sharp and eternal. These drips become the new metronomes marking centuries in patient tempo. Birdsong changes too. Freed from the need to shout over engines, their voices soften, lengthen, and explore. They perch on the ruins and let their calls bounce through atriums and between broken towers, creating echoes that blend into accidental choirs. What was once the chatter of sparrows becomes, in the silence of cities, something closer to chant, stretched and resonant. Water makes music wherever it moves. Rain on sheet metal is a percussion ensemble. Rivers breaking through old dams roar with power, their froth punctuated by the deep bass of boulders shifting. In flooded streets, ripples lap gently at windows, the sound of waves inside architecture that was never meant to hear them. Lakes form where parking lots once stretched, their shores tuned to the lapping of wind-driven water against curbs. There are stranger instruments, too. Rusting fences strung with wires vibrate in storms, humming like ancient strings. Radio towers, long silent, sway in wind and emit groans, almost like the opening of a bow across some vast cello. In deserts, sand piles against abandoned cars, the grains hissing as they move, creating whispers that rise and fall with the gusts. No listener is needed, but listening still happens. Wolves pause at the edge of ruined churches, ears tilted to catch the reverberation of their own howls bouncing from stone. Bats read echoes in their flights, weaving their navigation into the chambered acoustics of collapsed warehouses. Frogs croak in synchrony, using the reflective geometry of bridges to magnify their presence. Each creature, in its way, becomes both performer and audience. And perhaps the most haunting thought is this: the instruments we left behind, towers, bridges, bottles, wires, are temporary. Rust, collapse and soil will silence them in time. But the earth does not run out of music. As ruins dissolve, new instruments arise, hollow trees replace concrete halls, caves resound where once there were subways, the ocean itself sings, waves, crashing against cliffs, each note as ancient as it is new. Music without listeners is still music. It does not need meaning, only vibration. It does not need story, only resonance. Perhaps it is only humans who believed that a song required ears. To be real, the planet knows differently. The song exists in its playing, whether or not it is heard. Imagine lying down in the long future, in the grass of what was once a plaza. Above you, wind sighs through cracks of fallen stone, carrying a tone like a distant flute. Around you, crickets. Pulse, water drips, a bird calls into open air. Together, these threads weave into a piece that has no beginning, no end, no composer. It is not for you. It is not for anyone. It is only the earth reminding itself that silence is never absolute, that even absence has a sound. In that endless score, the question lingers. Was humanity's music ever separate from this larger symphony? Or was it always just one instrument? Among many, briefly played, now set down, as the rest of the orchestra continues without pause. The earth remembers cycles far longer than human memory ever grasped. Glacial ages come and go, slow tides of cold that sweep across continents, shaping valleys, rivers, and coastlines in silence. Our absence does not halt this breathing. Without us, the planet moves as it always has, drawing in cold, releasing, warmth, repeating the rhythm written into its tilted axis and wandering orbit. The return of ice is not sudden. It begins in shadows, in high places where snow lingers longer than before. Each year, the snowpack deepens. Summers shorten, winters stretch. In mountain ranges, glaciers that had been shrinking for centuries hesitate, then advance. Their blue tongues creep downhill, grinding rock into powder, carving ridges, splitting forests. Over centuries, the great ice sheets stir again. Greenland's glaciers, once retreating, begin to thicken. Antarctica sighs into expansion, its edges flowing outward into the sea. Slowly, patiently, ice climbs back into the latitudes it once claimed. What were once farmlands and cities lie under snow for longer portions of each year, until eventually they do not thaw at all. The silence deepens. Ruins vanish beneath this. Advance. Cities at northern latitudes are buried in layers of frost and snow, their outlines pressed flat under kilometers of ice. Towers crumble more quickly under the weight, but it does not matter. The ice does not need ruins to fall, it only covers. Bridges, roads, monuments, all sink into the vast stillness, entombed. Human traces that once resisted erosion and weather vanish beneath glaciers as though they were never there. From above, the ice glows pale, reflecting moonlight into the dark sky. Winds scour its surface, leaving patterns of dune-like ridges frozen into place. Blizzards sweep endlessly, erasing every feature until only horizon remains. It is not a hostile world, only indifferent, a realm where time is measured in accumulation, millimeter by millimeter, until millennia pass unnoticed. But ice is not only burial, it is memory. Beneath its weight, air bubbles are trapped, tiny, capsules of atmosphere. 10,000 years from now, should another intelligence core the glaciers, they might find pockets of ancient air, still carrying the imprint of human industry. Carbon dioxide, methane, faint traces of pollutants. Our presence would be sealed in crystal silence, legible in chemistry, if not in story. Eventually, as all cycles do, the ice recedes. Millennia pass, and the climate shifts again. Warmth returns, glaciers retreat, rivers roar with meltwater, seas rise. In their retreat, the glaciers reveal what they kept, Perhaps a fragment of a building, warped but recognizable. Perhaps a shard of glass, still glinting after millennia in cold dark. Perhaps nothing at all but the memory of weight, the scoured bedrock, the rearranged valleys. Does the earth keep these stories? Or are they only accidents, fragments left in passing? Ice does not care. It moves with gravity, melts with heat, builds with snow. It has no purpose but to exist, no memory but the marks it leaves behind. Imagine walking far into the future across a plain just released from ice. The ground is raw, scraped clean of soil, a vast expanse of stone and gravel. Tiny streams thread out across it, carrying melt into new rivers. In pockets, lichens bloom, the first color, faint against gray. In 1,000 years, moss follows, then grasses, then forests. Life reclaims what ice abandoned, as it always has. The rhythm is endless. Advance, retreat, advance again. To human eyes, such cycles once seemed like endings, disasters, cataclysms. To the earth, they are only breath. The return of ice is not tragedy but continuation, another verse in a song billions of years long. And perhaps the most haunting possibility is this, that when future beings study the scars of glaciers, they may not know that a species once lived there at all. The ice may have swept too clean, erasing everything but its own geometry. Our traces could be hidden so deeply that even geology forgets. The glaciers expand and contract, indifferent to stories. Their patience dwarfs ours. They move without, hurry without memory, and yet in their silence they hold the clearest reminder that nothing, not even human presence, interrupts the breathing of the earth. The earth in its silence does not know whether it is alone. It breathes, it turns, it circles the sun with patient certainty. But beyond the thin veil of atmosphere lies a greater expanse, one that has never depended on human presence for its continuity. When humanity vanishes, the cosmos does not pause. The stars remain, steady in their distances, and the possibility of other minds continues to shimmer like faint light just beyond reach. Signals leave the earth long after voices fall silent. For a century, perhaps more, the planet was loud in. Radio and television, spilling music, news, greetings, arguments, laughter into the void. Those waves do not stop when their origin disappears. They travel outward at the speed of light, growing thinner, fainter, but never halting. A sphere of signals now expands from Earth, a shell of whispers growing larger with each year. By 10,000 years, that shell spans more than 10,000 light-years, touching distant stars with traces of us. Most of these signals fade below the noise of the cosmos, indistinguishable from the hum of galaxies. Yet perhaps 1 in 1,000 carries clearly enough to be noticed if there is someone listening. A fragment of a song, a moment of a speech, the laughter of a child broadcast into the night. Could such a fragment, arriving at the edge of another world, spark curiosity? Could it remind another intelligence that somewhere, once, a planet spoke? If no one listens, the signals still continue. They are not wasted. They become part of the cosmic background, another faint brushstroke in the canvas of radiation that fills the universe. Like starlight, they need no audience. They exist because energy travels. They exist because motion does not cease. But the possibility of discovery lingers. Imagine another planet, circling its sun in quiet regularity, where beings with senses unlike ours build instruments to read the sky. One day they detect an anomaly, a pulse, a pattern, a modulation not natural to the stars. They isolate it, decode fragments. Perhaps they hear a voice saying hello, perhaps only static, interrupted by rhythm. Would they wonder? Would they try to answer? And if so, to whom would they be speaking? Even if no other intelligence exists nearby, The signals remain seeds scattered into infinite soil. Some may drift unnoticed forever, but others might fall upon ground capable of response. And if no response comes, the earth has still shared itself with the stars. A brief flare of voice among endless silences. Closer to home, the relics of our leaving drift as well. Probes sent outward, voyagers, pioneers, new horizons, continue their slow journeys beyond the planets. They carry plaques, records, fragments of human attempt at self-introduction. These probes do not return, but they endure, small artifacts of a vanished species wandering interstellar space. In millions of years, they may still circle the galaxy, patient as comets, silent as stones. Perhaps one collides with another world, shattering into dust that rains upon alien soil. Perhaps one is intercepted, studied, held. Each carries with it the possibility that someone, someday, might know we once were. This possibility is not certainty. It may be that Earth is never discovered, that no other mind stumbles upon our signals, our probes, our fossil record in stone. It may be that the universe keeps its distances, vast and indifferent. Yet even in this, the gesture matters. The planet has spoken once, briefly, through us. That voice does not vanish entirely. Imagine a being far away, long after we are gone, tilting its attention toward a star called the sun. It finds faint traces in the light, perhaps unusual chemistry in the atmosphere, perhaps the lingering hum of signals that began long ago. It wonders, perhaps, what story lies hidden there. It asks silently who spoke and why the voice has fallen quiet. Possibility itself becomes our legacy. Not monuments, not ruins, not even fossils in stone, but the simple fact that energy once left Earth bearing the marks of thought. That possibility continues outward, carried by waves and machines, into a cosmos that does not hurry. The Earth may forget us. The forests, the seas, the glaciers may erase our shapes, but the stars, receiving our whispers, keep them in motion. And in that motion, we remain, however faintly, not in memory, but in possibility. The ocean has always been the keeper of memory. Long before forests spread across the continents, long before mountains lifted their heads into the sky, the seas were already writing their patient story in layers of silt and shell. When humanity vanishes, the ocean continues this work without pause, folding our traces into its unhurried archive. Along the coasts, change comes quickly. Without levees, walls, or pumps, water seeps into streets and basements. Plazas drown. Tunnels flood. Whole neighborhoods slip beneath the tide. At first, their shapes remain. Rooftops like scattered islands. Statues rising through shallows. Fish move through windows. Seaweed drapes staircases. Barnacles bloom on bronze. The outlines of human ambition linger briefly before water begins its soft erasure. A few centuries pass, and the ruins have transformed. What were once towers are now reefs, blooming with coral, woven with sponges, alive with crabs and eels. Ships resting on the seabed serve as scaffolds for anemones and shoals of fish. The geometry of steel and concrete dissolves into the fractal patterns of biology. The sea is not a graveyard, but a workshop, turning wreckage into habitat. Deeper still, fragments of us drift downward in the perpetual snow of the ocean, tiny pieces of plastic, shreds of glass, traces of metal, mingling with shells of plankton. Grain by grain, they fall into the abyss, settling in silence. Over millennia, they are pressed into sediment, forming a faint line in the rock, an artificial horizon in the story of the planet. Yet the ocean erases almost as much as it preserves. Salt water softens glass to sand, turns concrete back to lime, spreads iron into rust. In the trenches, tectonic plates carry whole sections of seafloor downward into darkness. What was once a harbor, once a city, Once a coastline is drawn into fire, melted, recycled, returned to element, the ocean dreams by transforming. Nothing is lost, but nothing is kept unchanged. Meanwhile, life continues, untouched by our absence. Whales sing through quieter waters. Dolphins trace coasts no longer shadowed by propellers. Turtles hatch beneath starlight, their way unbent by artificial glow. In coral gardens, parrotfish grind stone into sand. In kelp forests, sea otters float and feed, unconcerned with ruins far below. The ocean's dream is not of us. It is of itself, alive and unbroken. 10,000 years ahead, shorelines are redrawn. Where there was city, there is estuary. Where there were fields, there are mangroves. Maps no longer match. The ocean writes its own edges, not in ink, but in salt and tide. And beneath those waters our traces lie hidden, some preserved in reef, some dissolved to chemistry, some pressed into stone. Perhaps one day another intelligence might wander Earth's seas and discover a fragment, a shard of alloy, a coin fused in shale, the ghost of a wall beneath coral. Would they see us in these relics? Or would they only see the ocean's patient dream, our presence folded so gently into it that it is no longer distinct? Imagine floating in that dream, far below the waves where light does not reach. Around you, the seafloor stretches in silence. There, in the quiet, the last fragments of humanity rest, softened, transformed, dreaming with the ocean. Not monuments, not warnings, not even memories, only matter moving, folded into the rhythm of tides and time. The drift into sleep begins gently, without boundary, as if the world itself exhales. The questions that linger, of fossils, of monuments, of signals in the stars, loosen and dissolve like mist at dawn. What remains is not answer, but rhythm, the steady rhythm of earth, the steady rhythm of time. Forests breathe in darkness. Their leaves shift in wind, a soft conversation with night. Rivers murmur across stones, carrying fragments of mountains toward the sea. Waves roll and fold, endless in their patience. Overhead, the Milky Way leans across the sky, vast and silent, a reminder that even silence is full. The earth does not hurry. It does not conclude. It simply turns. Ice gathers on peaks, melts again, gathers once more. Volcanoes smolder, then sleep, then waken. Continents drift grain by grain, unbothered by memory. All motion, all rest, all breath, continuing without need of witness. And so, humanity becomes part of this breathing. Not separate, not erased, only folded into the wider fabric. Dust from our bones mingles with dust from stars. Fragments of our tools become minerals again. Our voices, carried as faint waves into space, thin until they are inseparable from the background hum of creation itself. Presence turns to pattern. Pattern turns to silence. Imagine lying on the ground of a meadow that was once a city. Around you, crickets sing. Above you, stars scatter their light, uncountable, steady. The air is cool, the earth beneath is firm. Nothing presses for answer. Nothing insists on meaning. There is only stillness, only motion, only the deep patience of time. The drift into sleep is not ending, but release, a surrender into the larger breath of the world, the larger silence of the sky. You are carried on it, as forests are carried, as oceans are carried, as stars themselves are carried, and in that carrying there is rest. Sleep well.